So whenever you see a wound, some of the first things these are the questions that you want to think. Maybe, Ray, can you flip off the light? Yeah, okay. So you want to look at where it is. And so Ray talked about anatomy. And so tell me, well, we'll go to the next slide, but we're going to be thinking like, how important is it where the wound is? Could it cause this horse to be lame, or is it not a big deal? And then we're going to talk about how old is the wound, because that'll change what you're going to do with it. How deep is it? That matters also in how it will affect the horse. And then does it cause pain, and will it cause lameness or problems with your horse? So anatomy, remember, Ray went over, and those top three I listed are kind of the more worrisome areas of wounds. So if you see a big cut right on the hock and the back leg, or if you see a big cut on the knee, and it looked pretty deep, like those are really a worry, because if they go into that joint and that joint gets infected, sometimes we can't heal them, and sometimes they will be lame forever, or they'll get arthritis, and that will cause lameness. And so those are a really big worry. Or you remember we all felt tendons on the back of the leg, and we talked about how sometimes they're bowed. Well, if they're cut, instead that can be even worse, because a bowed tendon will usually heal given enough time, but a cut right through it sometimes will get infected, and the horse can't ever use it again. So those are the places that you want to use antibiotics with your wounds, that you want to clean it as much and as quickly as you can. And the barrel, I put that, why do you think I put that? The barrel is like, the main body of the horse. Why could that be a really dangerous place?
Vitals?
Yeah, vital. So if it pokes into their intestine or into their liver, or even just into that space, if that space gets infected, they can die from that pretty easily. So that's a really dangerous place to have a wound as well. Down on the bottom, I put kind of the areas we don't worry as much. So the face, it can look really bad, but they almost always heal pretty well, and even if they don't heal great, it doesn't usually hurt them. The chest and neck, it's a lot of muscle, and then just general muscle like on their butt, where we give the shots. That's where a lot of the wounds happen, luckily, because those usually heal pretty well. They usually don't cause lameness. They usually don't kill your horse. So they're the wounds that we still want to clean and take care of, but we don't worry about quite so much. So this is a new wound, and we'll talk about how we would know that's a new wound. And so that's one that would need sutures. And why would I be worried, or why would you be worried if that was on your horse? Yeah, it's right on that fetlock joint, that ankle joint. And you don't know how deep it is just by looking at that, so you want to kind of probe in there with have clean hands or gloves on your hands and try to touch in there, or try to just look in there and see how deep it goes. And then if you think it might go into that joint, you'd want him on antibiotics right away. And if it didn't go into the joint, then it would be less of a worry, and you could maybe just clean it or wrap it. Okay. So how deep is it? If it goes just through the skin, obviously those are not as big of a worry, because it's just skin regrows, it regrows really quickly. You might still want to suture it, because it could get infected deeper if there's a big flap of skin. But it's not, that's the least worrisome wounds. If it goes just into the muscle, that's not too worrisome either, but sometimes if it goes really deep, it could cause an infection deep in the muscle, and that can make the horse really lame and painful. And then you have to think again too, like what else is really deep beyond this. So like if it's on the barrel or the ribs, and it looks kind of deep, those would worry you, because they could go into the chest or into the abdomen or the stomach area. Or if it's back on the back leg, remember we were talking about shots? What was the groove on the butt that we said not to give a shot in? What lies deep there? Do you remember?
The nerve, sciatic nerve?
Yep, the sciatic nerve. So if there's a really deep wound right there, and the horse is dragging his leg or not walking normal, like that, it might have irritated or even damaged that sciatic nerve. So it's good to know those anatomy parts. How old is it? So if you want to suture it, and we'll talk about suturing more later, they really only work if the wound's like 6 to 8 hours old. It doesn't take long for bacteria to come in. even if it looks clean, the bacteria come in really quickly. And once bacteria are there and you try to suture it, they'll break it open. Like the infection will break open the sutures. The exception is on the face. We can often get away with even maybe 12 or more, 12 to 18 hours on the face. And that's just because faces heal, they're really vascular, there's a lot of blood flow, and they heal really quick. So you can get away with an older wound there. So how to know how old it is? I'm sure you've seen this, if the edges are really dry and kind of curled over, like you're not going to want to suture that. It's not going to work. If the whole surface is kind of scabby and crumbly, like that's older too, and sutures won't work on that. You still want to clean them, and we'll talk about how you might want to treat them, but you won't want to sew them. If they're really kind of wet yet or bleeding yet, and the edges look pretty fresh and flat, then those are the ones that, even if you didn't see it happen, you're probably going to want to suture those. And the suturing, the biggest advantage of that is it will just, and like I know Julie's done a lot of them out here, it just heals way quicker. And it heals with less risk of infection, and it heals with less risk of like adhesions or problems that might limit how they move. And then other things to tell you how old it is, if there's a lot of swelling around it, like if you come up and the leg is like a stovepipe and really swollen, that's pretty old. It's probably 24 hours or more old, and you're going to want to treat it again, but not suture it. And if there's a lot of drainage coming down it, not blood, but just like yellowish, reddish drainage, that tells you it's older too. Go ahead. So is this one an older new one? So this is actually out here this summer. We saw this at one of the places we went. So what's good about this wound?
It's clean.
It's pretty clean, yeah. What did you say?
It's not on the bone.
Yeah, it's not on any joint, it's not on a bone, it's kind of right there in that bicep muscle. And what else do you notice about the leg like, compared to the other leg?
Standing on it.
Standing on it, yeah, no?
The swelling.
Yeah, it's not really swollen much, is it?
No.
It's a little bit, but it's not way bigger than the other leg. And so that tells you it's probably not infected. It's not in a joint or an area that's going to cause permanent damage. It is old because it's like the edges are kind of black and curled, and it's kind of gross looking on the surface. I couldn't find a picture we had. I think we castrated this horse anyway. Did you see it? Oh, it's a filly. Okay, so we didn't. But you laid her down. Dr. Lauren saw her. So you tell what you did with her.
So another really good thing about this little girl was that she had a couple maggots in the wound. So they were cleaning out the dead tissue for us. So we just rinsed it out. We trimmed away the dead, dry, curled edges. And we gave her a dose of antibiotics and then left another dose for her owner. And she did really well. He told us this summer that she did one of the rides this winter. So that was cool.
Good. Yeah. All right. So then, how do you know if the wound is causing pain or not? Like some of it's obvious. If your horse is really shaking and sweating and seems really upset and shocky, like then the wound, you really worry that it might have gone like deep into their body, or it might even be a broken leg. Like I've seen some broken legs look like a cut because it broke through the skin, and then you realize it's actually not just a cut. It's like it's a broken leg, and usually that's from a kick or something that hit them really hard. So if they're limping, obviously they're painful. If they won't let you touch it at all, like they'll guard themselves and protect themselves. And so anything that's really painful usually needs more treatment than something that's just kind of a skin flap and they're not acting painful. Those we don't worry about as much. So these two, how about the one on the face? Is that new or old? That one's new. And I realize these pictures are kind of hard to tell. But if you look at that line, it's pretty like flat and smooth. It's not curling in or curling out. And it's kind of a nasty wound, and luckily it didn't hurt his eye, but it was awful close. So this is one that is fresh enough once you cleaned it really well. You maybe could suture it, although it almost looks like pieces are missing. But I think this flap right here could get pulled up, and sometimes we suture part of the wound because it'll heal away faster. Even if you only get half of it closed, it's less chance of infection, and it helps it become a little wound instead of a big wound. What about this one on that side? Do you think that's old or new? New. Yep. So the same thing. It's the edges are nice and smooth. It's red. The blood looks normal. What would worry you about that one? Yeah, there's tendons, the extensive tendons that Ray talked about come down the front. The bone is showing there, I think, actually. It's either tendon or bone showing, I'm not sure on that one. And is it into a joint?
Partly.
It could be close, both in the fetlock and the hop. It could be close. So you want to kind of look at those edges and see how deep it was. Go ahead. All right, so why do we worry about wounds so much? Because some of them do cause lameness, and they can like end your riding of your horse or even end their life if they're really severe. Sometimes it causes scarring, which we don't care just about a scar, although in our world people do care about a scar. Sometimes they want their horse to not have any scars, and I personally don't worry about scars. But sometimes scars can actually cause problems. Sometimes the scar kind of pulls things together, and then they're mechanically lame, so they can't use that joint or that leg like they should, and it might not hurt, but they still limp, and so it still affects them. So some of the methods of cleaning we'll talk about will help prevent scars from happening, especially your riding horses and your race horses, the ones you really want to use. It'll be more important for them. So are these two old or new? Well, how about that one on the far side for old? So that one's tricky. It looks new because it's kind of a nice red, but it is old. Whoever said old. The reason I know it's old, because I saw it, but also this little pink line right around here, that's new skin growing in. Wounds heal from the outside and they come in and they grow like a little edge of fresh skin. And so that's all fresh and new. It was a puncture. You can see it's like a big one, but then there's a deep puncture right there. And what would worry you about this one?
It is joint.
Yeah, it's really close to the hop joint. And I think later on I have a picture that shows the hock joint, and this particular part of the hock joint is not very deep under the skin. So that was really close. It wasn't in it, even though it looks like it could have been. It wasn't, luckily. And what's good about it, like what makes you not worry about that?
There's new skin growing on it.
There's new skin growing, yeah, so it's healthy, it's not infected. And there's not much swelling, like a little bit. That hock is a little swollen, but it's not huge. So that's good too. What about that one? Is that new or old? Old. Yeah, so it's crusty, there's some swelling around it. Do you think it's healthy or unhealthy?
Unhealthy.
It looks like unhealthy, but it actually is healthy. If you were to clean and scrape that off, underneath is this stuff called proud flesh or granulation tissue, and that's actually helpful for the most part. And the outside is dry and looks kind of cruddy, but the inside is healthy. So until you clean them, sometimes you don't know that though. Go ahead. Oh.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Would it be possible to, like an old wound, cut like a quarter inch all the way around it to get to the good skin and then sew it?
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, it's called secondary intention, yeah. So you can do that if there's enough skin, which on legs there's usually not, because it's really pretty tight no matter what. But sometimes on the neck or the chest, if you can cut enough, and you kind of have to cut till it bleeds or cut till they feel it, but if you can cut enough and pull it together, you can suture it. That way you have to make sure it's really, really clean, because if there's too much bacteria in there, it will still not heal. But yeah, you can definitely do that. So those, you recognize those two guys over there? It's Percy and Freedom. We're at the World Dairy Expo in Wisconsin. We have way more cows than horses in Wisconsin. But look at how tall, like you guys know Freedom and Percy's height. Look how tall that cow is.
They use the horses, okay?
Yeah, they were huge cows. And we walked in and Percy goes, holy cow.
That's Paula, that's it.
Was that Paula?
Holy cow, look at that cow.
after one of our rides when I think most of you, or some of you know, when we're out here working in the summer, after we're done working, our favorite day of the whole week is when they take us for a ride. And this was after one of the rides. We pictured those guys with their horse spirit sign. Good.
Those would be the ones who made it back in the ride, right?
Yeah.
Right, the rest of us are lost.
It was just too up.
So I threw in, so I go to some other places too and teach veterinary work on horses, just like we are doing with your group. And I go to Haiti, which if you know, like, so here's the United States and Florida is down here, and then Cuba is an island off of Florida, and then Haiti's like the next island over. So it's not actually that far away, but there's some amazingly bad wounds that we see there, so that's why I threw up these. And this is a fortress that sits on top of a mountain, and it was built 200 years ago by the Haitian slaves. They were slaves to the French, and they overthrew their French captors and I thought you'd appreciate this because this is something like I think your ancestors would understand. They wanted to overthrow them, and because they were slaves, they made all the meals for them, so they planned to pick poisonous plants in the mountains, and they poisoned them all like on the same week. And so many of them were dying of poison, and those who weren't dying they killed because they were ill. And they're the only slaves to ever overthrow their captors successfully. So they should be, I think, very proud of themselves.
Yeah.
So here's obviously a really skinny horse. And you can see this man, like when I go there, I'm actually not short. Like most of the people are about my height. And because their nutrition for both the horses and the people is really poor. And so they just don't even grow very tall. And neither do the horses. The horses are mostly about this tall. They're like 500 pounds. You know, we're doing the weight tape. So most of theirs are 500 pounds. And very skinny, as you can see. And you can see this really bad wound right there is from the saddle, because the horses at IOC are, they carry people to that fortress. It's a tourist kind of thing. And unfortunately, they carry big tourists. And, you know, they're 500-pound horses, and sometimes the tourists are 250 pounds, and they go up a steep mountain for about 1.5 miles, and it's really steep. And the horses a lot of them have these back sores. And so that's one of them, like that's awful looking. You can imagine how much that would hurt. And that has been there so long, that's his withers, like this is his head, and then his withers come here, and then his back. And it's been there so long, it just shifts, it moves around under the saddle. And that will never heal unless they just quit using him. But most of these horses, it's their only source of income. And so, a lot of the people only make maybe $3 to $10 a week off of their horses, and so they can't quit using them. And so we've been working with a group, actually from England, who have been teaching them how to make those new saddles. And you can see it's like a little Western saddle. It has a tree that bridges their back. And even when we put a dye on there, it didn't touch their back. So I think that is going to be life-saving for these horses, because we've tried to feed them more. We went from 70% of them had really bad wounds in their back, and now only about 25% do. But we can't get that last 25% to heal. And we did that by deworming and better nutrition. But now they're a little better nutrition, but they still have these sores. So the saddle is our last answer, I think, for that. Go ahead.
I have another question.
Good.
Because some of our youth around here have horses with large sores on their back, if they continue to ride them, would that affect the spine?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. We've seen sores when we've been out here that look not quite that bad, but
Yeah.
like that. And
I've seen several where you could almost see the tips of the spine.
process,
yeah, do you remember from anatomy from Ray, the spinous process? It's called the backbone sticks up, and it's right under there, and you can kind of feel the bumps of it sometimes. And you're right. If it gets deep enough and they get irritated, they can get infected even, and if they get infected, then you may never get that horse comfortable to ride again. or it could even become life-threatening
Mhm.
for them. So yeah, they have to either get a saddle or ride in a different position or just not ride for a while. Or put more weight on. Sometimes it's the weight of the horse, again, because if there's more muscle over their back, it's less likely to happen.
Yeah, I've given some saddles to those boys.
Yeah. Do they use them?
I bought them in the pawn shops in Rapid City.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's, because the saddle, if it fits well, should completely stop that, wouldn't it? Yeah. That would be good. And so this is like one of the first times we went, that skinny horse, and this is just a few weeks ago I was there, and this horse had been one of our skinniest ones. His name's Kiki, and he's looking pretty good, but you can see how his backbone still kind of sticks up there. And they live on mostly banana tree leaves. There's like, it's really green, it looks like, but there's very little grass. It's jungle, and it's tropical, so it's like thick fibrous plants, and they're not nutritious whatsoever, and they have no protein. Like Leslie was talking about protein and how much we need. Well, banana tree leaves have like no protein. So those horses, even when they're kind of good weight, don't have muscle, and that's our biggest problem with them. So this one I just threw in because it was gross. I have not been to Peru, but some of the people I work with do a similar teaching in Peru. And those are all worms. And I think Lauren talked about worms. Yeah, that horse wasn't alive. Like this is his large intestine. And he was colicking super bad because he had never been dewormed. And they put him down because he was colicking so bad. And this is what they found when they looked inside of him. And he, like, the worms had just destroyed his intestine because he had never been dewormed in his life. So it's kind of an extreme example, but it shows us why deworming is so important. Go ahead. And then we teach other vets. We want, there's so many horses around the world that don't have veterinary care, and my goal is that they all do someday, which is a pretty big goal. But the more that we can have, the better. And so in Costa Rica, we teach other vets how to go to new places and how to teach and how to give veterinary care to horses. And Lauren is actually going with us in January to Costa Rica. She's one of the vets going. And Ray is going to go someday. Maybe Jim. So this is a skin disease that luckily we don't have here. You guys know what that is? Ray and Jim? Tabernomyces. Yeah, so we don't see that luckily, because that horse's whole head is swollen, and it's little tiny larvae that get laid in they're like little bitty holes you can see, and you have to pick out, they lay like these little calcium deposits, and they cause inflammation, so the whole head blows up, and you have to pick them out every day for weeks, because it just keeps kind of burning the horse, and ivermectin helps kill that too, but it's really hard to treat. And then this is ticks, do you see all of them? Like, this is actually 1,000 ticks right there. Like, it's not just these big ones, every little one is a tick. And I know you guys sometimes see ticks to maybe that degree, and so we see them everywhere. This is not a wound. That horse unfortunately had cancer, and it had gone beyond his eye. It was like in the bone all around, so there wasn't much you could do for him. But why do you think he had cancer? Like, what about him makes you think he got it? He lives in a tropical place. He was in Costa Rica, so he's always in the sun, and he has white skin. And so white-skinned animals get cancer around their eyes much easier. So your Appaloosas and some of your paints, you have to kind of watch their eyes because they get it more easily than other horses. Go ahead. All right, so we're going to hit a few different types of wounds. Go ahead. Here we go. So that was a spider bite. I saw that in Haiti. And that was when I first saw it. I cleaned it. It was like not as shiny. And you can see that big hole. And it's, I haven't seen your rattlesnake bites right when they happen. I've seen them like later when we've been here. But they kind of can eat away the muscle or bone sometimes, don't they? When they get a rattlesnake bite. Do you see that? Does it like eat holes in them?
I've seen them where it swelled up and for, I haven't seen one.
It doesn't eat away?
that
Okay.
would eat away.
I didn't know if it did at the
Swelled up
beginning.
and like hard,
Yeah.
the muscle around it was real hard.
And then
It
there,
eventually died.
yeah.
It wouldn't stand for a little while and it would go down.
Sure. So this one actually had like gone in and the bone inside the jaw here was kind of rotten. But he could still eat, but we've done surgery a few times and scraped away the dead bone. And it's healed up now. I didn't have a now picture, but it's just a little tiny scar. It's healed nicely, but it could have been worse. So puncture wounds, I'm sure you see these here. This is one I had at home. You can see this fence post is right through his neck. And so thinking of anatomy, like what could have happened to this horse? Yeah, he was scratching, you're right, and that's how he got it. And so, and then what could have it hurt?
Is regular.
Yeah, it's really close to jugular. And you remember when we watched it yesterday, like that jugular, like Jim said, is a garden hose? Like if this post had hit it, we would have found him dead, like there's no way. And I was a little bit afraid when I pulled it out that I was hoping it wasn't like plugging a hole and that it wasn't about to have bleeding. But I kind of looked at it close. And then his trachea, his windpipe is right there, pretty close. And you're right, as somebody said, neck bones, I think his vertebrae is back a little.
Was it above or below the
It was below.
below?
Yeah, it's kind of dark, but it was really just kind of a flap of skin that was under it luckily. And that picture, which is even probably harder to see, is just like, I think 2 weeks later. It healed up really nice luckily. Because it was, once we pulled the stick out, there was a big old hole that you could look right through his neck.
Hey, Judy,
But he was
just
good.
while you've got the tracheal injury there, I know we were talking about the reactions you can have with IM shots where I commented if you feel them, you feel little bumps, it's like feeling cellophane, and that's a real bad infection. That's another instance where you can get that cellophane feel. It feels like Crepitance is what they call it, but it's a little bubbly stuff. You can feel it almost snap under your fingers. But it's not an infection. What it means is they smack the trachea. The air is actually leaking into. I've seen them blow up the whole head from it. That looks cool, but it's not a bad infection thing. So I've had a couple of them do that.
So this is a pressure wound, which I imagine could happen out here, like with your otter gates. You don't have stalls that they can do it in like we do necessarily. But this horse was on his back and rolling or something, and his hind leg got stuck between those bars. Like they should only be that far apart, and he got wedged in there. And they're further apart because the people hold them apart. And this was what it looked like right at the time. This is where it was stuck. And they called me out, and I was like, oh, it's not too bad, you know, it was like scraped, and he was walking on it, and so we were like, oh, that's good. He escaped. Well, then, like a few days later, it started looking like that, and it's like black, and it's swollen. And then about a week later, it looked like that, and it had broke open. I think there's one more. Oh no, go back one. Why don't you, Leslie? Thanks. And so it had. There was so much pressure, it's like if you put a bandage on too tight, or if something's tied on too tight. Percy and I were talking about how bandages too tight can just kill the tissue completely. It cuts off the blood supply. And this horse did it himself. He was between those pipes so tight, he cut off enough blood supply. He luckily didn't lose his whole hoof, but he lost all the skin on one side, and it went down into the pasture, and you could see like every little ligament, and you could see the bone, you could see everything. It was like we dissected it. And now you can go ahead. And this is actually, so the owner wrapped it and cleaned it every day and did a really good job of that. And so this is a couple weeks later, actually maybe a month later, and all that probably flesh is growing in, and which is healthy and covering up all those things. Because our biggest worry when all the bone and ligaments were showing was that it would get infected. And then if the bones or ligaments get infected, you could die from that. And then there it is. This is more prep flesh. So sometimes wounds are really ugly, and as you've seen some ugly ones heal, and their horses are pretty good at growing proud fleshing and trying to cover it. And that was then a little later, and that was him being ridden. She does like medieval reenactments or something, so she has like a sword. But he's a good horse. Alright, so this one, you can't really see this picture here, but there's just a little tiny wound, like a little tiny hole there, and it looks like not a big deal, but it kept draining and draining, and for weeks it had like pus coming out, and the face was getting more and more swollen, and so they called us, and we come out, and there's a chunk of wood that he had shoved right into his face. And if they have a chunk of wood or wire or something else like that, they'll almost never heal. They'll just keep draining. And so if you see a wound like that, you know there's probably something inside of there. And if you can take like tweezers or something and try to go up in there and pull it out, sometimes you can even feel it on the outside, and you know there's something in there. And otherwise it just won't heal, and it will hurt them. Go ahead. This is an X-ray that showed a wound. So this horse had stepped on like a carpenter nail, like a big long nail, and it shoved it straight up its foot. And we put this needle in, and it was following. We just followed the hole after we pulled the nail out, and we put the needle in, and then we injected this dye that on X-ray shows up white, and you can see how the dye is going straight up the leg. So unfortunately for this horse, there's those tendons that we were feeling in the back of the leg. There's like a sheath around it, it's like a little covering around it, and the nail went through that and up into that covering, and so the tendons were infected too. And so this horse didn't live because he couldn't walk at all on this leg, and it's really hard to treat the infection if it gets any tendons. And usually, unless you do surgery on them, they usually won't live. And you can, that one. You can see also if they step on a nail, this is the navicular bone, and there's this joint right here, the coffin joint, which is inside the hoof. If the nail hits one of those areas, it can be really deadly for them too. If the nail just goes somewhere else, like down here or here, then they'll usually get an abscess, and they'll get really lame, and it'll have to break out, but at least they'll get through it, and they'll live. So nails in feet are always a big worry. And what do you do right now if you see a nail in a hoof? Have you seen that? Have you seen them step on something and have it in the hoof?
Yeah.
What did you do?
I just pulled them out. They were not that long, maybe.
And did the horse get an abscess from it?
Yeah, he was lame for a while. He's walking around fine now.
Yeah, good. So it wasn't too deep.
Yeah, it was kind of like towards the front of the hook, too.
Yeah.
The tips.
I've seen a couple when we've been out here working. I've seen a couple that we've pulled out and done that too. At home, we tell people not to pull them out until we can get there an X-ray, because then we can tell what it's touching, and we have a better idea how to treat it. But obviously here you just want to pull them out, get it out of the way. Go ahead. I thought after all those gross worms and wounds, I would throw in pretty pictures. So this was last year's ride. There's Freedom, who was leading us. And that's a view in Haiti. We climbed up through some caves, and we're looking out over the city. Go ahead. All right, so cleaning wounds. The best thing, all of us were talking last night about how we all do wounds, because we all, as doctors, we all do it a little different. There's so many things you can use, just like probably some of you use different things and do it differently. There's a lot of ways that work, and some are better than others, or better as in less harmful to the wound. But really the most important thing is cleaning it, and just water, like running a hose on a wound is by far your best way to do it if you're by a hose. If you get a bucket of water and spray it on or sponge it on, and that cleaning will get the bacteria off, will get any dirt or other debris off of it, and that's by far the most important thing. But not just when it happens. It's important to keep doing it over and over and over, and really until the wound is healed, and at least every day or every other day, as often as you can. And will they heal without that? Yeah, most will, but they'll heal faster and a little better if they have that. Did you give me a pointer? I did. The tree in the back. Thank you. And so you can see this is a hind leg, this is the top. So it's pretty darn close. She's a barrel racer, and this is her young, up and coming, like, supposed to be her best barrel horse yet. And so she was pretty worried because, well, actually at first we weren't, because we saw that and it didn't look too bad. you can see the snow was actually super cold and this was all frozen, like all the tissue was frozen. So we knew we couldn't sew it because it's been damaged by being froze. And so we brought it in, cleaned it up, and once we like shaved the hair off, that's what it looked like. And then we were a little more worried because you can see how by being froze, this is all like frostbit and kind of dead around there. And then go ahead. So once we looked at it closer, this is day 4, we could see this, you know, at first it was just like that, but this huge flap was all dead, and it was a big pocket down there, and fluid kept accumulating in it. And sometimes we'll put a drain down here, like a little tube, so that all the fluid can come out, but it was so kind of rotten and dead, we just cut it all off, because we knew it wouldn't heal in very nicely. So then this is day 7, and this is like little foamy bubbles that are accumulating there, but it's starting to look a little healthier. And so, and my vet associate she's a little kind of OCD about things, like she's very, very particular. So she wrapped this for 3 months, every day she changed this wrap. I don't know if I would have gone quite that long. But she wanted it to look perfect, and she wants this barrel horse to be able to use her hock perfectly, you know? And so she really did. I didn't have a picture now, that was in January, but it healed perfect. There's a little tiny line, and she moves perfect on it, and it is no lameness. But it did take, to make it be perfect, because if it had healed with a big bump there and a lot of proud flesh, she wouldn't be able to bend it quite as well, and it, you know, in barrels, a 100th of a second makes a difference, and so it might have affected her. So sometimes it can take a long time. This is, before I mentioned proud flesh, do you all know what proud flesh is? What I mean by that? It's called, the other word we use is exuberant granulation tissue, but it's proud flesh. It's just, so the horse is really good at making too much tissue. They try to fill in the gap, which is good, but then they go overboard and it goes above. And so whenever it's sticking above the level of the skin, then it's kind of too much. And sometimes there's different ways of taking care of it, and I have another slideshow that I'll show you that does that. But sometimes we'll take a scalpel blade or scissors and we'll just slice it right off and make it smooth with the level of the skin so it's not above it. And they can't feel it, there's not nerves in this, and it'll bleed like crazy because there's a lot of blood in it, but there's not nerves, so they can just be standing there and you can slice it all off. And then usually we try to wrap it or put pressure on it for a while after you do that to stop the bleeding. But if you do that, the skin can come over and close much easier than if it has this big ball of proud flesh that it has to try to close on top of. And it's something you want to make sure it is proud flesh and not other tissue, but when you get to that kind of bubbly looking, and Percy has a wound we're going to look at this afternoon that I think is probably proud flesh, so it'll be a good example of that. Go ahead. Do you guys want to we're going to get into suturing as the next part. Do you want to take a break, or you want to just keep going? Take a break? All right, we'll take a 5-minute break. Before I do suturing, I was just going to mention, Jim was telling me another idea. I've not heard of this before, but it's for proud flesh, if you want to share it.
I worked in a big Amish area, and one of the Amish guys actually came up with this. But if you can get a hold of some formaldehyde, now I don't recommend this on this thing that's sitting over the joint or anything, but just a regular proud flesh, you need to take some layers off. And like Judy said, when you cut it, it makes a bloody mess, which you may or may not want. But if you get a hold of some formaldehyde, use like a Q-tip and literally paint it just on the proud flesh portion of things. Don't get it on the skin, otherwise you'll start having the skin lose its fat. But what formaldehyde does is essentially it'll dry it out by pulling the fat right out of it. Leave it on there for 2 days, and you'll end up with a layer that you can actually peel off. And then you put it back on again for the next layer. And you can peel it down just like an onion until it's flush with that skin, and if that skin cross it, you're good. So, and it's worked, kind of a unique thing. I haven't used it in a few years, but that's just because I'll cut it off and wrap it. But it's kind of nice.
I think it's hard to get now.
Is it hard to get now?
Yeah.
The shipping requirements,
All right.
material data, safety stuff, getting that stuff.
All right.
Yeah, you can't give a shit from outside.
So you gotta know somebody.
Wear
I know
gloves,
the mortuary.
smell it, nose.
Check with your veterinarian.
When you're picking up that GMSO.
Just call Dr. Jim and have him come out for your birthday.
Well, what's in, it's a combination, but what's the big close stuff that everybody uses to harden us? What's the common stuff
To
that,
harden us.
yeah, farriers will recommend? for
Bacon
soap?
grease.
No, it's an actual.
Boom hard.
It sounds like Netflix, but it's not, it's,
Copper sulfate, copper top.
what is it? Caratex. Caratex, we read the ingredients, formaldehyde.
Is it?
Yeah, which I've been mixing up for years for a hoof hardener, because formaldehyde actually can soften the sulfur bonds in the hook. And I know you guys have had a little bit of some soft hooks out there these last couple of years with the rain. But I wouldn't use it, I would use it as a animal.
Yeah, I've heard of using formaldehyde on like thrush and stuff, and if it's in the proper hands and stuff, it can be effective, but it scares the heck out of me. And the guy that was talking about it showed pictures of the horse's hoof that was basically pickled. Basically killed the whole foot with formaldehyde. So that's really terrible stuff.
The other thing I see your drain for cleaning your kitchen sink also has the formaldehyde if you look at the ingredients. Like
Here, that's Drano. She said
if you look at
Drano?
has
Don't
formaldehyde.
use Drano.
But if you're looking at for formaldehyde, it has formaldehyde in there to clean my sink.
Please, we're gonna go ahead and go on to the next part.
Don't use any formaldehyde.
No. All right, so we'll go on to suturing. So funny story, my son, a lot of you know my kids come out here with me every summer. My youngest son is 10 now, and he was getting ready for Halloween. He was trying to put together a costume with things, and he comes up to me, this is last week, he's like, Mom, I know you don't really know how to sew. Which is right.
Yeah.
So I spend all my time doing vet stuff. And he goes, but I know you kind of sew animals. He goes, so do you think you could sew my costume? So I'm going to take my suture and I'm going to sew his costume. All right, so we talked about wounds. They have to be fresh, like we said, or at least either you know when it happened or it looks fresh. You have to get them really clean before you even think about suturing. Some of you have, Julie I know has used lidocaine. I think you've used it. And some of them, yeah. Lidocaine, and lidocaine is like if you go to the dentist and they numb your mouth, it's that same kind of medicine, and it numbs the skin. And we have a bottle for each of you in the bags that we have. So if you want to use it, sometimes horses I know will just stand for you and you don't have to. And if you're looking at a wound, like say this is a cut and there's like a flap, usually the flap doesn't really need it. Like they're not going to feel that much. It's this upper part that's connected that needs it. And so we'll go over this afternoon how you will put it in. And there's in your binder there's a handout on wounds and it talks about the lidocaine a little bit as well. But if the horse isn't liking you suturing, it certainly makes it easier if you can get that in there and less painful for them.
And you.
And you have to trim a tiny edge. So Percy was asking, like, if it is kind of an old wound, can you trim a big edge off and suture it? And we were saying if it's loose enough, you can, and you can pull it together. Even if it's brand new, like even if you saw it happen, you still, or after you clean it all up, you're still going to want to trim a tiny little edge off, because almost immediately cells are damaged or start to close or die off, and so you want a completely fresh edge to sew together. And it doesn't have to be much. It has to be just like the littlest bit you can get with your scissors, and trim that fresh edge, and then it will stay together when you pull it together way better. And you would do the lidocaine first if you wanted to, because they don't like that trimming either. And then you pull it together, and we'll go over some different ways of suturing. And then, just like if you're wrapping wounds on the legs, if you suture them together and then turn them out, they'll break open almost guaranteed. Because if they're moving a lot, and especially if it's like where they bend the joint, the sutures aren't that strong and it'll break. In your bags are a bunch of suture packs too, and we have two kinds. We have non-absorbable and absorbable. And absorbable, the body will degrade and eventually it'll just disappear, and then the non-absorbable you have to cut out. In your packs, it's only absorbable, because I know like it might be hard to find that horse soon enough, or it might be in a place that's hard to get to, so you don't have to worry about ever taking them out. If you put them in, they will go away on their own, and that makes life easier for everybody. So, and then we do, I think it's the next slide, Leslie. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to suture, and we're gonna talk today and this afternoon try these three. It's simple interrupted, simple continuous, and a mattress pattern. And there's different doctors have different preferences of which ones they use. Some of them, like the mattress pattern, works better in an area that has tension. That's kind of hard to pull together. These simple continuous, it works nicely that's fine. Simple continuous works nicely if you want to get done kind of fast, and maybe it's on the face or something like that. So there's different reasons to use them, and we'll kind of talk more individually as we're trying that this afternoon. The size of sutures, in your bags there are going to be two sizes, 2 odd and 2. And this is small. 2 odd is a small size of suture, and you would use that more like internally. If sometimes we put 2 layers, like if there's a big deep hole, we'll try to close muscle and then skin over it. And so the little ones you use either like on the face or deeper in the muscle. The bigger ones you want on the outside because you need more strength to hold it together. And then yesterday, Leslie and I were talking about what else, or maybe Percy and I were talking about what else you can use to suture, because you don't always have suture. So, and I know Zia's told me that he's used tail hair before off the horse. And then Leslie was telling me about yucca plant yesterday. Have you, go ahead, Richard.
What about animal sinew?
Yeah, you could use animal sinew, for sure. And that would be tough, like if you had a wound that had tension, I would think that would work well, because it'd be strong. I would think it'd be fine if it's clean, like you'd want it, like probably be best, what's that?
It's the tendon.
The tendon, okay.
Yeah.
So it'd probably be best if it was like boiled or washed, you know? Well, I guess you won't want to boil, but you want it clean anyway, as clean as it can be. Because if it's going through the tissue, you don't want that to cause
At least
infection
wipe
too.
with your disinfectant.
Yeah, at least rinse it.
Or iodine is rinsed off with it.
And have others of you used yucca? Do you want to describe, Leslie, the yucca plant
Well,
method?
basically, the way I was trained, I haven't used it for actual sutures, but I can make thread out of it if I lose my button on my pants out in the pasture. Easy. So I can take the yucca leaf, pound it between 2 rocks, and it'll come out with thread. And it was an old way that they used to get the thread. And the very tip of the yucca, most of you know it's pretty sharp. If you bump into a yucca plant, that's your needle. It'll go through most material. And but then they would basically roll, after you got the fibers out and the flesh off the yucca, you can roll it between your hand and you'll have like a yarn, but it'll be real thin. So you have your needle and your thread out there in the pasture. But it's an old, not too many young people use that anymore.
Which I thought was a neat idea, and we don't have yucca in Wisconsin. So I don't have that option.
At John's Garden, they do.
Right, at a store. Go ahead. So this is in your notes, and oh, I'm
I
sorry.
had a question about the thing with the yucca. Did you say like it was just sort of temporary? I mean, was that something that, like, if you need to do it right away and that's available, to use it, but then would you need to replace that later on if that's what you used? I mean,
I don't know. how long
It
it
would,
will last.
it's a natural fiber, so it should hold and take away. You want to apply the same sanitation if you have it available. And, but
I'm just curious because we don't have a lot, but there's some by us.
Is it?
Yeah.
if it's more of an emergency,
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
what I was
have the
thinking.
suture and stuff.
But then would you need to, I mean, would you still need to replace that, or is that, you know, whether or not that's strong enough to hold?
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like,
don't know.
It's strong.
And the stuff we use for, I mean, you're literally sewing leather together when you're sewing a horse. Whoever's done it over there can kind of explain to you, but it's not soft, so our sutures a lot of times break up, and there's a fine difference. We use nylon a lot, which is a non-absorbable, and it's very strong, but the problem is, it'll also cut through the skin. So it's a fine line, and that's why the suture's been designed so that it's the strength we need without being too much. And it's very hard to duplicate that, to be honest with you.
well, the question probably, you know, because I never thought of doing that before.
And that's just the emergency.
Yeah, that's what I was.
But it is super strong. It will hold my button on my pants till my pants rot. In there if I need it. And because it used to be used as a natural thread.
So that would be something like they might wanna even consider if they were on a long ride. Until they could hold it together, until
Till
they
they
could
could
trailer the horse somewhere.
Till they could
Yeah,
call
to
a
get
vet.
stitched
Yeah.
or whatever,
Okay.
just a thought.
Attempt it with the yucca plant, if you got somebody, attempt it first before you need it. And, you know, try it.
Try it. Try out some bananas.
Yeah.
Make some bananas up there.
There you go.
So this goes through the different patterns. Personally, I think this is hard to understand, just looking at this. I do it better when I'm doing it. And we will do that this afternoon. But this is showing, and you guys, obviously you can just use your hands to do it. We do have little, they're called needle holders, that are little instruments that hold the needle and you can drive it through. It is, I think it's easier just because you have a little more control over the tiny needles. And I think Julie's used one and you thought it was, you've done it both ways, but thought the needle holder
with the needle holder.
made it easier, yeah. So you'll have those too. But you take it and you can see you don't want to be like way back here. If this is your cut, you don't want to be way back there because it'll bunch together. You want these two edges to come together tight, but not to overlap and not to gap. They have to be just close together. So you take a little bite, we call it, or you go through the skin here and then come out here. And this one must be a simple continuous because there's not a knot in every one. If it's the simple interrupted, you're gonna tie a knot in every single place and cut it and start over. And the simple continuous, you just keep going. Kind of like lacing a shoe, you just keep going up. Or it looks like a football, kind of, too. And again, I think it'll be easier when we break up into groups this afternoon. Each of us will be with you and with a couple people, and we can talk through these a little more. Wounds are tricky because we're teaching what we can on the suturing, but there's so many things that you'll kind of learn with experience. Like you'll try them and some will work and some will not, and you'll learn why they work and why they don't. And it depends on the tension and where the wound is and how big it is, and so some of it you'll just have to try, and then you'll learn more. Some of the things you don't want to do, like you do want to make a square knot. You do want it to, you see the two sides are coming out as you tie it, they're pulling really evenly, and this knot's coming down really evenly. You don't want to do a half hitch, so like if you pull it and you kind of just pull one side of it and the knot slides down like a half hitch, that will come untied and your knot won't hold and the suture will open. So you want to make sure you're not doing half hitches, that you're doing like a square knot or a granny knot, they call it. Surgeon's knot is actually something you might want to learn because it just means instead of doing one cross and making a square knot, you do twice. You go through it twice and have like a double square, and then pull it down equally. And it has way more strength. It will stay in place way better, especially if there's a little tension on either side trying to pull it apart. If you do just like this type of knot, as soon as you pull it and try to do your next one on top of it, it'll just gap open. But when you do that, it'll almost always stay together. And when we make these knots, we don't tie just one knot, we tie usually 3 or 4 times and do like one on top of each other, and then it stays in place much better and it's stronger. Go ahead. So this again is a simple continuous, so you can see there was a knot tied up here at the beginning, and then you just loop through and go down. Usually it's about like a ½ inch or so apart, and then again not too far from the edge. Ideally, you kind of bite into the muscle here. You don't just take the skin, although in some cases, if it's just a skin wound, you can just take the skin and you just bite as deep as the skin goes with your needle and pull it up. And then at the end, and again, we'll show you hands-on how to tie the knot at the end. The nice thing with a simple continuous is that you only have to tie 2 good knots at the beginning and the end, but they have to be really good, because if either one comes out, you lose the whole thing. With a simple interrupted, every single one has to be a good knot, but if one comes out, it's not as big a deal because you still have 10 others. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The mattress is, so this is if it's kind of hard to pull together and there's more tension, you'll come, see how this is, oh, here's your needle. Okay, so it came in the side, came out, and then you loop around, and then you go back in that same side, and you're coming out over here, and then you tie your knot so it's on the side of the wound instead of being on top of the wound, like a simple interrupted or continuous would be. So you don't have the wound, like the knot sitting where the wound is trying to pull it apart, the knot's all sitting on this side, and it gives it a little more strength. So those are the kind you use like maybe on a leg that you don't have much extra skin and it's hard to pull together. I don't use them much on the rest of the body. I don't know about you guys. I typically use them on legs. Go ahead. Staples, sometimes when we've been out here, we've had staplers, not like paper staplers, but medical staplers, which look the same. We've had them donated to us, so we've sometimes used them, or had them anyway. I hardly ever staple wounds on a horse. Their skin is thick, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of pull on the wound, and staples don't work very often. I'll use it sometimes on a face wound, and you still have to clean it, you still have to trim the edges, you do everything you would do, but then you can just staple it down. But for the most part, they'll only use it on faces. There might be a few exceptions to that, and again, it's a special big medical staple, it's not just a stapler. Go ahead.
That's all.
These I just threw in for fun because they're different. So this was in Costa Rica, they have vampire bats. And so this horse had, whenever we see this, and we see it quite a bit, when there's 2 little punctures that distance apart, they're about like maybe an inch or so, it's a vampire bat bite, and down below this was a ton of blood because they have like an anticoagulant in their saliva, and so it makes it start bleeding, and it doesn't stop bleeding, and they suck the blood. And then when they're done, the horse keeps bleeding for a while, and so you find all this blood on the side of the horse, it's usually on their neck, and then when you clean them up, you find these 2 little fang marks. And it's really interesting, the bats go back to the same horse night after night. There could be 10 horses, and they will bite the same horse every night. And I don't know why that is, but and you can't stop it hardly other than like moving the horse a long distance away. And they can carry rabies, but they can also just make the horse really anemic. Like their blood gets really low. Richard?
Garlic around the horse.
I'll suggest it.
Try feeding them garlic and see if it changes their taste.
Yeah, maybe at least pick the other word.
Give the horse a bad seat.
This was
You beat us to it, right?
interesting. I don't know if you can really see it in this picture, but there's like this bumpy, rough stuff right here. Do you guys have any ideas of what that is?
Babies.
No?
This
one, it's on the skin, it's really rough, it's attached right to the skin, and it's really, it's not a scab, but it's like rough and kind of growing outward, and it's bare, there's no hair on that. mange, it's a good idea, it wasn't in this one.
That was the type of skin that was on one of our horses. It was up on, by his neck, or whatever, right here. And there was a hole on the bottom and on top. Right, and the skin around it was like, it was dried rawhide.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like you had had an
And then
infection under
I
it?
think I called you, or called up to, John. And he told me what to do, is to clean it up.
Yeah.
And he told me it was, didn't throw it or something.
Sure.
But that's where I found that.
Yeah, like right here,
Yeah.
throat ledge.
On the
Yeah.
lower jaw.
Yeah. Yeah, so this one actually is, I heard Ray say the right answer. It's a sarcoid, so it's a type of skin tumor. Have you guys seen any out here?
I think I've seen one.
Yeah, I think I have.
I've seen one.
What is it? Sarcoid. It's a skin tumor that horses get. We see them quite a bit at home.
What happens?
It's, well, they can be either kind of flat like this and just bumpy and no hair, and that's not a real big deal, unless it's right where like your tack goes, your saddle or something. But then some actually grow like a nodule, like a round mass, and it just keeps growing outward, and they can get huge, and they can bleed and ooze, and like in the summer the flies will lay maggots in it and stuff. And so they're hard to get rid of. They're a tumor, and they're just on the skin, but they don't go inside their body, but they can be really hard to get rid of. But I think they're very rare out here, which is good.
Usually associated with cattle or nearby usually.
Yeah, which is probably why we see them a lot more. Go ahead.
Could it happen when they have it cut? Does it look like that below it?
It
Or would that
can.
be something
Yeah.
else?
No, you're right. If they have a cut, they can, sometimes the drainage from the cut will burn the skin and you'll lose hair like that. That's common. And then sometimes the skin or the cut, if it doesn't heal real great, it can have like a callousy, almost feels like the chestnut of the horse. Like it can have like a scar around it, and it can kind of look like that too.
And what if it's like still a buck?
Like just raised up.
Yeah, kind of like still small knot, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a piece of chestnut.
If it's not growing, and if it doesn't really hurt them if you grab it, then it probably doesn't really matter. They might not cause a problem. Go ahead. This is my vet car in my front seat, and this is a little baby miniature horse that was an orphan. I took him home and I had to feed him every 2 hours. So he rode in my front seat.
And then you
You
came to
have
the
it?
house, remember? And-
Yeah, he stayed in my house until one night, like in the middle of the night, I got up to feed him, and there's diarrhea all over my kitchen. And from then on, he stayed in the stall at the clinic.
But does he still ride the front seat?
No, actually, so this, I'll tell the story. He just died actually last month. She was 2.5 years old. This is a while ago. And Lauren will talk about colic tomorrow, and he died she died because of colic. So she's a mini little horse, and one of the other vets at the clinic owned her, and she would let her eat grass just a couple hours a day because, like we were talking on nutrition, our grass is loaded with carbohydrates and sugar, and it's really dangerous for our horses to eat, especially little ponies or minis. Dangerous because they get too much calories and too much sugar. And so she let her graze for 2 hours a day, and she was used to that. And this is just like a month ago, she did that, and then was fine, was eating. And then all of a sudden, she looked out and she was flopping on the ground and really painful and kept flopping. And she called one of our other vets, because I was telling Lauren and Catherine, like, when it's our own horse, suddenly we don't know anything, and we're like, what's going on? Because we're always more worried when it's our own horse. And so we call each other. And she was colicking super bad. Like, they couldn't make her comfortable. They were giving her pain medicine, and she just kept throwing herself down. And then she got really shocky and actually died, like, right then and there. And so they did an autopsy. They cut her open to see after she died, and her stomach had blown open. It like blew. It was in half, and there was grass all over her, inside of her. And it was, so she kind of ate herself to death. but we don't think it was just that she ate too much grass. Our grass can be so rich that sometimes they'll build up gas inside their stomach because of the grass, and she must have built so much gas up, and that's when she was really painful, and then her stomach ripped open, and that's when she got shocky and died. And so it's kind of crazy, like we do see it, but we don't see it a lot, but it was so sudden, because she was happy and grazing, and then all of a sudden pain. So it's really sad and
I
kind
know
of
the minis are known for gastric,
rupture.
after gastric compaction. I mean, I've seen literally maybe 1 or 2 full-size horse gastric compactions,
Mm-hmm.
but minis,
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know if it's a motility thing or what, but.
Yeah, I've only seen like maybe 2 other ones too that did that, but not quite this quick.
But it'll be a veterinarian's one.
I know. Yeah. So any questions on wounds? I'm sure as we do it, when we're doing the suturing, you can certainly ask some. I have this other wound actually I'm going to show, just go through the steps of it to kind of give examples of different things. Go down to that. And it's the one Sarah. It will come up just like you can. Alright.
What, if you have a deep, like, wound in the muscle, big gash, and you have to treat it, what type of antibiotic do you give it?
So penicillin is
Penicillin?
usually a good choice. The downside is you have to, and we'll talk about penicillin
Yeah.
in medicine tomorrow more. But you have to give shots in once or twice a day, so that's the downside of it, but it still works pretty good on most wounds. We have, when we're out here, we use that one called Exceed that lasts for 4 days. And I love it because it lasts for 4 days. And so if you give it twice, you've covered a lot of the time you need. Unfortunately, that's really, really expensive. And so we get it donated when we come out here to work, but we don't always get it as much as we want
You
of
gotta
that.
buy that too, so that makes it harder, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then there's sulfa, like pills, that are sometimes pretty effective too. You do have to give that by mouth twice a day. So, so they all require, there's something, like some horses are harder to give mouth than to give a shot, and some horses are the opposite, but any one of those can work. And you will get a penicillin bottle in your bag as well, so you'll at least have some on hand if you get a bad wound.
And Percy, you've had the sulfa powder. You've
Yeah.
used that quite a few times, you know how that works too. So
Yeah, maybe pills or powder, right?
Pull it off, prove it works, and then start selling it. You
Yeah.
stick it out there for a year, pull it off, put that date on it, and then sell it so you get it on the market. Penicillin, I honestly, I don't use enough of it, but
I don't
yeah,
use
I
a
think
lot.
6 months is fine.
I know like some of the dairy farmers at home, it sits on their
It's just
window in the barn,
that same needle is used for everything in the last year.
and it still stinks.
Don't do that.
I don't know. All right, so this is Sarah. She's a mule that just came into our clinic a month or 2 ago with that wound. So September 10th it was. So if you can see, this is her cannon bone. This is the whole bone showing there. And her fetlock is really swollen. This is a big flap of her skin. This is really swollen. She got caught in a high tensile fence. So around us, we have some barbed wire, but we have a lot of these high tensile that's like super hard to break, and they don't break, and that's what happens. They rip their legs up because the fence never breaks, and so they're really damaging. So one of our vets went out and saw her. It couldn't be pulled together and sutured because it was just kind of shredded and older. We talk about age. It was maybe borderline once it got cleaned up, but the edges were curling. This was cold, and it would have been unlikely to work if she sutured it. So this is 3 days later. It's cleaned up now. You can really see the bone now. And this is still, you can see how this is all, it's like kind of wrapping. Like this is an extensor tendon probably, but it's all shredded. And this is all black and dying. And we were wrapping it every day and it was just draining, like, the wrap was soaked through, it was soaking wet every single day. And we were just using saline, like, we were soaking the saline pads because it was helping to like soak up all that drainage. Saline's just, you know, like salt water, basically. And she was on antibiotics, but the wrapping is what, like, this is kind of wound, if you did something similar, the wrapping is, and the cleaning of it is what really healed this wound more than anything. Go ahead. And this is just the 4th day, so it's only a day later. You can see this is like really dead stuff. Like, this is not going to heal. This is, the muscle's all dead there. So so we debrided that, we cut it, and like Ray or Jim said, I think it can be bloody. Like, it was bloody. Look at that. It's like pudding because it's all clotting. And she lost a lot of blood, but we had to get it cut down to healthy tissue or it was just going to drain forever.
Do you want to explain what debriding means in case somebody in here doesn't know what that means?
Yep, so debriding is just cutting. So basically, like, instead, like before I was talking about cutting the proud flesh, well, this debriding can be cutting proud flesh, but it can also be cutting just dead tissue or cleaning up the edges. So we took scalpel blades, bless you, and we just cut off everything dead. And she didn't feel it. She actually damaged the nerve so bad to this leg. She's never felt us doing anything to it, which kind of makes it easy to clean. But there's another problem I'll tell you about later of why that is. But basically just cutting away everything dead with either a scissors or a scalpel blade. This is the day after we did that. So now you can see, at least it looks better. It's red and not brown and black and dead. But still the whole bone is showing right there. Go ahead. I don't know if this will play. It's a little video. I don't know if you can click on it. I don't know. It'll work. So you can see she's actually walking pretty good on it, isn't she? Like, that kind of amazed us. What doesn't show is that because she lost all those extensor tendons in front, remember Ray talking about flexors do this and extensors extend, she does it pretty well when she's walking, but sometimes we'd see her kind of flop like this because she didn't really have those tendons to make it come up. And with the bandage on, you don't see it as much. When she's unbandaged, we see it more. But then what she started doing too, she'd stand in the stall and she would just stand like that resting all the time. And so we worry about this leg getting too much weight on it and getting hurt. And then we worry about those tendons in the back of the leg that we felt. If they're like this all the time and not being used, they can contract and they can get shorter and then they don't work anymore. And so we started walking her a lot more and we started, and then I heard Ray's idea of that inner tube tying it, so we might try that. Because it's healing really nice, but we want to make sure she doesn't get contracted and can't use them. All right, you can go this way. So now 9 days later, this is looking pretty healthy now. Like, that's not quite proud flesh or granulation tissue coming in, but it's getting closer to it. And there's this thing called calcium alginate, which is a special kind of dressing that helps bring in proud flesh so that it can cover that bone. So we started using that, but again, washing and wrapping would do the same thing, it would just take a little longer. Go ahead. And you can see that proud flesh, that's fine, keep going. So now here we're 16 days afterwards. Now this is granulation tissue or proud flesh. You can see how it's kind of bubbly and it's pink and that's real typical looking. And you can see these little seeds here. This is tissue trying to come in to cover the bone. So we're getting excited now that it might actually cover it. Go ahead. You can do a couple, maybe one or two more. So now here, this one, you really see these little red specks. These are all little cells, like all parts of this that are starting to grow across the bone, and this is 21 days. And then that's only 2 days after that, and you can see that bone's almost covered, and do one more. And there, we were like super excited this day, because we can't see bone anywhere. It's just crazy how fast those cells come across and how they cover it. And basically it's there, it's like completely covered, and this is super healthy. It's bright pink, there's still some drainage, but it doesn't stink anymore. And so this is really healthy tissue, but we've kept it wrapped non-stop pretty much with a polo and a quilt, we call it, which is kind of like a towel. So it wasn't a fancy wrap really, it was just some pressure on it. And she's still walking good and doing really good with it. I think there's one more. So we debrided again, the thing, we've cut away the tissue or debrided the tissue quite a few times. That's the other part, because if we hadn't, by now it would stick out to like here. You know, it would be bulging way out in front of the skin because it would just keep growing like that. So that's the other key of why it healed up. Go ahead.
But like, is that leg thicker than the other leg, or?
A little bit, but not a lot. I think it will be, like the front of it's gonna kind of bow out a little bit, I think. But it won't, and this will be bigger. You see her fat, this little shelf is gonna stay there, but it doesn't seem to hurt her when she bends it. I don't know if there's any more, yeah. So we're actually thinking, well, you can see the fresh skin growing in, this little edge, it's this little nice pink edge, the fresh skin is growing in. And this owner loves her mule. She's kind of an older mule, but she just loves her and she wants to do anything we can do. So we're actually, I think they did it yesterday maybe, they were going to do skin grafting. So they take little tiny punches out of like the horse's or the mule's neck, and then they take those little pieces of skin and bury them into this, like in a little row, and then that will help the skin start growing faster across it. We haven't really actually even done that before, but we've read about it. So we're gonna try it. And there's Sarah. So it's just kind of a cool case that's doing really well, but it shows you how wounds are tough, like whether they're here or anywhere, like they're tough to work with. And but if you stick with it and really clean it every day and wrap it if you need to and really doctor it, they'll come along. So I think, unless there's other questions, we're set with that for now, and maybe I don't know when lunch is ready, Paula, do you know? If lunch isn't ready yet, in fact, maybe, do you want to just do toxic waste right now? Because usually lunch isn't ready till 12:30.
Hey, Judy, just real quick, so I'm gonna tuck out. Those who got to, actually first, thank you, Judy. Those who got to feel in that horse's mouth yesterday, I just wanted to point out, because we got a nice skull here, it's a lot easier to show. So what you were feeling is about halfway back. There was that big old space right there. You get your finger in there and everything. So it was probably right between these two. I actually should have counted which teeth numbers they were, but they were right between here.
Lunch is ready, if you guys want to do that after the.
No, he's just reviewing one
So
thing.
that was just packing with food. So all we did is pulled all that out. That's what stunk so bad, was just that food sits up in there. The other thing is there was a little lump on that bottom at the same spot. We took that down a little bit, so hopefully it doesn't pack as bad. And then that back tooth, you felt that went straight up, and we just took that down. So that's about all we could do on her, and see if she puts on more weight. And Julia's gonna go out in winter and feed her next year. But I've got to take off, so I really appreciate you guys having me here. And I thank Judy for setting all this up while Paula's not here. But appreciate you guys having us out, and thank you for a time of year where I could really enjoy your beautiful res here. It's just been gorgeous. So we're ordering that for this weather for next July.
Yeah.
Pull it off, prove it works, and then start selling it. You stick it out there for a year, pull it off, put that date on it, and then sell it so you can get it on the market. Penicillin, honestly, I don't use enough of it, but
I don't
yeah,
use
I think
a
6
lot.
months is fine.
I know like some of the dairy farmers at home, It sits on their
It's
window in the barn.
That same needle's used for everything in the last year.
And it still seems
Don't do
to
that.
work. I don't know. All right, so this is Sarah. She's a mule that just came into our clinic a month or two ago with that wound. So September 10th it was. So if you can see, this is her cannon bone. This is a whole bone showing there. And her fetlock is really swollen. This is a big flap of her skin. This is really swollen. She got caught in a high tensile fence. So around us, we have some barbed wire, but we have a lot of these high tensile that's like super hard to break, and they don't break, and that's what happens. They rip their legs up because the fence never breaks, and so they're really damaging. So one of our vets went out and saw her. It couldn't be pulled together and sutured because it was just kind of shredded and older. You know, we talk about age. It was maybe borderline once it got cleaned up, but the edges were curling. This was cold, and it would have been unlikely to work if she sutured it. So this is 3 days later. It's cleaned up now. You can really see the bone now. And this is still, you can see how this is all, it's like kind of rotten. Like this is an extensor tendon probably, but it's all shredded. And this is all black and dying. And we were wrapping it every day, and it was just draining, like the wrap was soaked through, it was soaking wet every single day. And we were just using saline, like we were soaking the saline pads because it was helping to like soak up all that drainage. Saline's just, you know, like salt water, basically. And she was on antibiotics, but the wrapping is what, like this is the kind of wound, if you did something similar, the wrapping is, and the cleaning of it is what really healed this wound more than anything. Go ahead. And this is just the 4th day, so it's only a day later. You can see this is like really dead stuff. Like this is not going to heal. This is, the muscle's all dead there. So we debrided that, we cut it, and like Ray, or Jim said, I think, it can be bloody. Like it was bloody, look at that. It's like pudding, because it's all clotting. And she lost a lot of blood, but we had to get it cut down to healthy tissue or it was just gonna drain forever.
Do you want to explain what debriding means in case somebody in here doesn't know what that means?
You know, so debriding is just cutting. So basically, like, instead of like before I was talking about cutting the proud flesh, well, this debriding can be cutting proud flesh, but it can also be cutting just dead tissue or cleaning up the edges. So we took scalpel blades, bless you, and we just cut off everything dead. And she didn't feel it. She actually damaged the nerve so bad to this leg. She's never felt us doing anything to it, which kind of makes it easy to clean. But there's another problem I'll tell you about later of why that is. But basically just cutting away everything dead with either a scissors or a scalpel blade. This is the day after we did that. So now you can see, at least it looks better. It's red and not brown and black and dead. But still the whole bone is showing right there. Go ahead. I don't know if this will play. It's a little video. I don't know if you can click on it. It'll work. So you can see she's actually walking pretty good on it, isn't she? Like that kind of amazed us. What doesn't show is that she because she lost all those extensor tendons in front. Remember Ray talking about flexors do this and extensors extend. She does it pretty well when she's walking, but sometimes we'd see her kind of flop like this because she didn't really have those tendons to make it come up. And with the bandage on, you don't see it as much. When she's unbandaged, we see it more. But then what she started doing too, she'd stand in the stall and she would just stand like that resting all the time. And so we worry about this leg getting too much weight on it and getting hurt. And then we worry about those tendons in the back of the leg that we felt. If they're like this all the time and not being used, they can contract and they can get shorter, and then they don't work anymore. And so we started walking her a lot more, and we started, and then I heard Ray's idea of that inner tube tying it, so we might try that. Because it's healing really nice, but we wanna make sure she doesn't get contracted and can't use them. All right, you can go to the next one. So now 9 days later, this is looking pretty healthy now, like that's not quite proud flesh or granulation tissue coming in, but it's getting closer to it. And there's this thing called calcium alginate, which is a special kind of dressing that helps bring in proud flesh so that it can cover that bone. So we started using that, but again, washing and wrapping would do the same thing, it would just take a little longer. Go ahead. And you can see that proud flesh, that's fine, keep going. So now here we're 16 days afterwards. Now this is granulation tissue or proud flesh. You can see how it's kind of bubbly and it's pink and that's real typical looking. And you can see these little seeds here. This is tissue trying to come in to cover the bone. So we're getting excited now that it might actually cover it. Go ahead. You can do a couple, maybe one or two more. So now here, this one, you really see these little red specks. These are all little cells, like all parts of this that are starting to grow across the bone, and this is 21 days. And then that's only 2 days after that, and you can see that bone's almost covered. And do one more. And there, we were like super excited this day because we can't see bone anywhere. That it's just crazy how fast those cells come across and how they cover it. And basically, it's there. It's like completely covered and this is super healthy. It's bright pink. There's still some drainage, but it doesn't stink anymore. And so this is really healthy tissue. But we've kept it wrapped non-stop pretty much with a polo and a quilt, we call it, which is kind of like a towel. So it wasn't a fancy wrap really. It was just some pressure on it. And she's still walking good and doing really good with it. I think there's one more. So we debrided again, the thing, we cut away the tissue or debrided the tissue quite a few times. That's the other part, because if we hadn't, by now it would stick out to like here. You know, it would be bulging way out in front of the skin because it would just keep growing like that. So that's the other key of why it healed up. Go ahead.
But like, is that leg thicker than the other leg, or?
A little bit, but not a lot. I think it will be, like the front of it's gonna kind of bow out a little bit, I think, but it won't, and this will be bigger. You see it fell back. This little shelf is gonna stay there, but it doesn't seem to hurt her when she bends it. I don't know if there's any more, yeah. So we're actually thinking, well, you can see the fresh skin growing in, this little edge, it's this little nice pink edge. The fresh skin is growing in. And this owner loves her mule. She's kind of an older mule, but she just loves her and she wants to do anything we can do. So we're actually, I think they did it yesterday maybe, they were going to do skin grafting. So they take little tiny punches out of like the horse's or the mule's neck, and then they take those little pieces of skin and bury them into this, like in a little row, and then that will help the skin start growing faster across it. We haven't really actually even done that before, but we've read about it. So we're gonna try it. And there's Sarah. So it's just kind of a cool case that's doing really well, but it shows you how wounds are tough, like whether they're here or anywhere, like they're tough to work with. And but if you stick with it and really clean it every day and wrap it if you need to and really doctor it, they'll come along. So I think, unless there's other questions, we're set with that for now, and maybe I don't know when lunch is ready, Paula, do you know? If lunch isn't ready yet, in fact, maybe, do you want to just do toxic wounds right now? Because usually lunch isn't ready till 12:30.
Hey, Jim, just real quick, so I'm gonna tuck out. Those who got to, actually first, thank you, Judy. Those who got to feel in that horse's mouth yesterday, I just wanted to point out, because we got a nice skull here, it's a lot easier to show. So what you were feeling is about halfway back. There was that big old space right there. You get your finger in there and everything. So it was probably right between these two. I actually should have counted which teeth numbers they were, but they were right between here.
Lunch is ready if you guys want to do that after they're.
No, he's just reviewing one.
So that was just packing with food, so all we did is pulled all that out. That's what stunk so bad, was just that food sits up in there. The other thing is there was a little lump on that bottom at the same spot. We took that down a little bit, so hopefully it doesn't pack as bad. And then that back tooth, you felt that went straight up, and we just took that down. So that's about all we could do on her, and see if she puts on more weight. And Julia's gotta go out in the winter and feed her. But, I've got to take off, so I really appreciate you guys having me here. And I thank Judy for setting all this up while Paul is not here. But appreciate you guys having us out, and thank you for a time of year where I could really enjoy your beautiful res here. It's just been gorgeous. So we're ordering that for this weather for next July.
Alright, so lameness is limping, you know, it's caused by pain, it can be caused by a lot of different things. These are some of the things that I've either seen out here or have heard you talk about or know happen everywhere. And some of these lamenesses are mild, some are severe, some are sudden, some are not. And we'll kind of go through the different things and how you can, what you can watch for and what you, how you, excuse me, can tell what's going on.
Can you go back so we can get
Yes.
to that that's written?
And I can probably, if you guys want these PowerPoints as notes, I can probably get them printed for you too.
Okay, well, could you?
I
email
finished,
them or
yeah,
something
I can do
to
that,
us?
because I finished them late last night. So
Can you take a hard copy? I'm going to do it for documentation reasons in our book.
Yeah, we can do that. Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Or wait, maybe she's not ready.
We're good. Thank you.
Sure. So sudden lameness is, you know, when you see your horse become suddenly very lame, usually it's an injury or trauma of some kind. Sometimes it's an infection. If we have a wound that might not even look that big, but it's a deep puncture type of wound, they can get swollen and infected, and they can be non-waker and lame, like they can look almost like a broken leg because they're so painful from the infection. So sometimes that's what you may see. Abscesses, I think probably all of you have seen foot abscesses. You know, they can be really lame and not want to use their leg at all. So the thing to do is back to our anatomy, look at the joints and the tendons, feel those, and that comes back to knowing what your normal horse feels like, so you know if it's swollen or not. Feel the hooves, if one's hot, more hot than the others, it's probably an abscess that's coming. Go ahead. This is a picture that shows the inside of the knee. So this is like if you're looking at it from the side, this is the back of the knee. You know how you can look at a horse how it sticks out just a little bit? That's called the accessory carpal bone, but that's what sticks out on the back of their knee. And then you can see this is a joint space, and this is a joint space, and they're and then up here is another one because there's another bone above that usually. And so if they fall on their knees hard, or if they're kicked in the knee, or if their legs are a little crooked, over time they can get arthritis, and these spaces fill in. And this is looking at it from the front. So this is like that line is the same as this bottom line here. And so that line needs to stay open for it to be comfortable, and if they get injured, it can fill in with bone, and that's how arthritis develops. So in knees, that's one of the common things that we see. Sometimes they'll get kicked and they'll chip off like a little piece of bone right here or anywhere, and that little piece of bone, if it's in that space, will be really painful. And so that when you see that a big like knobby knee, sometimes that's what's happened. It's either arthritis or a little chip. Bowed tendons we talked about with anatomy. So if your horse is suddenly really warm, hot in this area, you can see how it kind of bows out a little bit. If they're painful when you touch it, if they're in bowed tendons, probably some of you have seen it after a race. So, you know, if they take a really bad step racing, it's high speeds tend to bow tendons more easily than just out riding. But it's good to know because a year later, this same horse might still look like that. but that tendon will be cold and non-painful, and that's not a problem. So even when they heal, they sometimes still look bowed, but it might not be a problem anymore. So one of the first things you should do if you ever think you have a bowed tendon is to cold hose again. And like wounds, tendons, like so much good is done from cold hosing, or stand them in a creek. You know, stand them in a cold creek and let that water be over that tendon. Nothing decreases swelling, and there's this whole thing with inflammatory mediators, it's called. So it's like the body, if the body's injured, it sends in all these cells to try to help the injury, and they're like little cells that are inflammatory mediators. But if there's too many of them, that inflammation can cause pain, and it can also cause problems. And so the cold decreases the inflammation, and that helps allow the body to heal. CJ? We'll say Clifford.
My question, I guess, would be, so whenever I got my ankle wrap for the horse, do I put any type of soft, compression bandages with it on it for pressure, or do I just wrap it straight up?
Are you wrapping it like after it's injured, you mean?
Like after something like that, right?
It depends what you're using. If it's like a polo kind of wrap, or like a back on track, you know, those kind of synthetic wraps, you can just put them on. But if you're using vet wrap, if you're using the stretchy stuff, you want cotton or a towel or something underneath it. Yep, we went over that a bunch this morning too.
He wasn't here.
I know.
That's not fun, Paula.
Everybody else is laughing.
This next one. So, generally, when we think about toxic plants in horses or in any animal, animals that are out grazing on the plains, a lot of times they're pretty smart, and so they're pretty good about avoiding what's not good for them, but that's not always the case. And at certain times, especially when forage is limited, it's more likely to be an issue with toxic plants. And so what Leslie was talking to us about yesterday is sort of important, not just in terms of thinking about getting horses ready for the winter and how many horses you can have in a certain area, but it also might affect, if they start to get hungry, they might start to eat certain plants that they might not eat at other times. So that's kind of another thing to think about, and that I try to think about with regards to how many animals are in an area. The other, maybe you guys have heard the phrase before, the dose makes the poison. And that's something that's sort of interesting in medicine, because sometimes we use parts of plants that if you were to eat a lot of them would be really bad for you, but in a really small amount are helpful. So when thinking about toxic plants, it's really helpful to know, like, oh, well, how much does a dog or a cat or a horse or a cow need to eat before they have a negative effect? The problem is, a lot of times, especially with horses, we don't always know the answer to that. And the other problem is, sometimes we might be able to identify that a horse has eaten something that's bad for it, but we don't necessarily know how much it ate, and it can be really hard to get those answers. So it'd be great if we knew exactly how much, but we don't always. So in general, you know, we try to avoid the plants altogether and hope that our animals have enough that they don't need to eat them. So I already mentioned that in terms of kind of understanding what the plant is really helpful, and while I love plants and I'm always trying to learn more, again, you guys are going to know a lot more about that, but I did think it was kind of interesting to search on some of these, there's just really cool websites that are available that can help with identifying. And this one was kind of a cool one. I just Googled wildflowers in South Dakota, and they had good pictures. I think there are probably other websites and books, you know, that do a better job of explaining like what to look for exactly. But so that's kind of another resource that I'll continue to use certainly, and might be something to think about. The other thing is once you notice a horse is sick, oftentimes there's not a lot to do at that point. Even for us back at home, a lot of times there's not a whole bunch we can do. But if it's something that you see maybe in lots of horses, or it's becoming a problem, then that might be an indicator that maybe it's a good time to go through, walk the pasture with somebody that is good at identifying plants. So I just picked out 5 to talk about. And choke cherry is one that I always think about out here because you get the delicious choke cherry jam. And so I want to start by saying, of course, the fruit's not poisonous, but as it turns out, the leaves and the seeds are poisonous, and they have a toxin in them that's related to cyanide, if you've heard of that chemical. And what happens is, if the horse eats too much of the seeds or the leaves, the cells in the body need oxygen in order to breathe and do what cells need to do, and even though the oxygen is there, they can't actually use it. And so that's how that plant works. But again, it's not sure how much needs to be eaten, and our horses do a pretty good job, I think, of avoiding it. All right, so this one is called white snakeroot, and what you might see with a horse that has eaten white snakeroot, the toxin is called trematol, and it's not important to remember that, but we talk sometimes about the trematol tremors, and basically what happens is it just makes them kind of like shaky, like they're just tremoring all over, so they're having muscle tremors. You might also see them also affecting their muscles, this kind of sawhorse stance. And the pictures that Judy just showed of laminitis, sometimes they might even look like that. But again, it's a problem with their musculature. So this one there were some kind of interesting things about how to identify white snakeroot. And they have these little white, beautiful flowers. They can get about 3 feet tall. And then these ones, there's a lot of plants I've noticed that look like this. And so these ones like kind of shadier areas. So they might be something you would see under trees. And again, we don't actually know how much a horse would need to eat to suffer some of these, but it's just kind of an interesting plant to watch out for. Another interesting fact about white snakeroot is, I guess Abraham Lincoln's mom was poisoned by white snakeroot because her cows had been eating it, and then so the cows got poisoned, and then the toxin went into their milk, and so Abraham Lincoln's mom drank the milk and got really sick. So, interesting historical fact. All right. So I put water hemlock right after white snakeroot just because you can kind of see it's another one that looks really similar. And so I, as a non-plant expert, probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart, but maybe I would just be avoiding plants that look like that in general. This one is super poisonous, but most of the toxin is in the roots. So this would be a bigger issue, I guess, if horses were really like pulling up the plants, which I guess sometimes can happen. These ones, the white snakeroot tends to grow in sort of shady areas under trees. This one tends to grow more in low-lying wet areas, maybe like a drainage ditch. So just like the white snakeroot can make them kind of shaky, this can make them shaky too, and it's for kind of a different reason, which why it's making them shaky is probably not the most important thing, but in this case it's a neurologic toxin, so it's interfering with their brain, their nerves, and so they might, a word that we use a lot in medicine is this word ataxic, and it basically means they're like kind of uncoordinated in how they're moving, and they're walking sort of like they're drunk. And so again, that can be a sign that something has happened with their brain, their spinal cord, or their nerves, and the messages aren't being conveyed correctly. And then this one, we do have a little bit more of an idea. They would need, I guess, about 1 to 2 pounds, which to me seems like a lot. I guess I don't think I would want them to eat any of it, especially knowing how toxic it can be.
This will kill people too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, when the gal from Pet Poison Helpline came to talk to us, she was saying that this has been an issue with people sometimes because I guess the stem people sometimes will like whittle the stem and make whistles, and people have died by making whistles out of the stems of water hemlock.
Because it's hollow in the center, but
Yeah.
some people recognize it as a wild carrot. There was an individual here in Manderson that ended up in Rapid City because they thought it was wild carrot, and it was a medicine person that they misidentified. And they barely pulled her out.
Yeah, so it can be a really dangerous plant. All right, next one. All right, so what's kind of covered there is the word ragwort. So this is prairie groundsel or ragwort. And again, in school, and we talk a lot about this kind of category of toxin called the pyrrolizidine alkaloid. And again, that name isn't very important to remember. But why I put it up there is lots of different plants can fall into that category, and the groundsel and ragwort are just sort of a couple of examples of it. And the way these ones work, and I put some pictures up here, and the problem with groundsel and ragwort, or any of the pyrrolizidine alkaloids, is over time, if the horse is eating kind of a lot of them, it can cause damage to the liver. And So like I said, usually it involves a chronic exposure, so they might have been eating a little bit for a long period of time. So unlike maybe a water hemlock where they might just eat a little bit and then become very sick, this might be something where they eat a little bit a lot. But again, hopefully in a pasture where there's plenty of other stuff for them to eat, this wouldn't be as big an issue. But some signs that you might be dealing with a liver disease, one thing that I think is kind of interesting that can happen. So of course the liver is involved in detoxification and it's involved in metabolizing a lot of things in our bodies. And one thing that can happen is it doesn't properly metabolize some things that then can cause areas of the skin to become very sensitive to light. And so this can be an issue in light-skinned horses. I think we were talking about that with tumors earlier. And so like Appaloosas or horses, especially horses that have pink skin, could potentially, just like they're more vulnerable to sunburn, they could be more vulnerable to liver disease, which is kind of interesting. Another thing that can happen with prolonged liver disease is they, again, can become neurologic because the liver isn't detoxifying the blood, and then toxins can be in the blood that then, or even just normal byproducts of living, the liver can't properly deal with, and then those can go to the brain and cause the horse to become essentially sick in their brain. And again, usually chronic exposure. So on the next, so I think these are really cute little flowers. And if you go to the next one, Leslie, and they kind of reminded me of dandelions. So I just put the pictures next to each other for my own benefit to, again, show kind of, for many people here, I'm sure, are better at identifying different plant types. And for me, I kind of have to look at them compared to things that I'm used to seeing. So I'm used to seeing a dandelion with a little, like, you know, round head and then the characteristic leaves. So these kind of are bright and cheerful like that, but they have different leaves and sort of a different, their petals are much more distinct. So that's helpful for me as I was thinking about how I would identify them. And then I think I just have one more. So this is, in general, we call it crazy weed or local weed. And that is sort of another general term. There are actually lots of different plants that kind of fit this category. Maybe you've heard talk of vetches, it's a type of plant, and that falls under this category. And a couple of species would be astragalus and oxytropis. And I think these white plants up here are much more common in the sort of the southern Great Plains, so I don't think there are as many up here. But the purple ones, that's something that could potentially be in this area, and they tend to be kind of in a low bush like this. I think they only get to be about a foot high, and they can have those kind of pale purple flowers. They're really pretty. And again, these ones, kind of like the name implies, they might make a horse act kind of like it's crazy. And this can be an issue more in cattle, but can be an issue in horses. And again, it makes them act neurologic, so there's something going wrong with the brain, spinal cord, or the nerves. And so you might see a behavior change. They might just act kind of dull or depressed. Something else you can see is the way they stand, just like we talked about how they can be ataxic and they're just kind of uncoordinated in their movement. You might also see like they have trouble using their limbs correctly. They might like kind of stand with their hoof knuckled over. And the toxic dose, because there are a lot of different plants that can be considered local weed or crazy weed, the toxic dose really varies. And again, just like with ragwort and groundsel that we talked about, oftentimes this is a chronic exposure over time. So they've eaten a little bit, a lot. So those were kind of just, I think that was the last slide.
Catherine, I've heard with local weed, and maybe you guys have seen it, I heard it's somewhat addictive too. Once they start eating it, they'll seek it out and they'll try to eat it. I saw one horse in Colorado die from it when I was in vet school. But that's even worse because they try to find it.
Yeah, they're the cattle.
They also pull of the alkaloids from the soil, which are part of that little poison.
Sure. I think the plants pull the alkaloids out of the soil.
Yeah.
So, if an animal is addicted to that, how do you really rehabilitate them? To where,
Put them in a different pasture
Yeah, or pull them off pasture for a
where
while.
that plant isn't there.
so for how long would you say
For the rest of their life, they're always gonna go back once they develop that taste. I don't know, try to go back. You have to feed them something else, because they don't have a taste for it.
Have you guys ever noticed these
It's
plants?
kinda like these candy bars.
Yeah. In your pastures?
Out in the hills,
Yeah.
You seen these ones or
all
some,
over, yeah.
or some of the other ones? Oh yeah.
They go all over.
They're so beautiful.
I think from what I've read, I think they won't eat these unless they kind of have to, like if they're starving and.
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
we don't have problems with the horses eating it unless it was that only plant in the pasture.
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
just eat it then, but I don't think we have that. That's a
So that again
problem.
is the purpose for leaving half and only taking half of the 4-H. You're keeping your Mother Earth and everything in balance, and if you graze it down like they mow a lawn in Rapid City, you could get in trouble and they'll go get this because there's not enough pasture out there. But if you follow that basic range rule, you shouldn't have a problem. There is
Well,
one.
you have cows, I suppose you probably have to have that, you have that problem, you know, grazing down different
That
pastures.
depends on the manager of the range. If they're doing good
Yeah,
management,
and if you don't have enough land,
yeah,
and any person will know that from observation that the ground that you're grazing down is move your animals.
there is one plant you need to be aware of early spring in particular called death camas. It looks like a wild onion, but it's one of the first plants that comes up. And if you see, and it's real heavy in our pastures, if they're grazed down real short, that one will come up and they're gonna eat it because there's nothing else out there. And that will kill them in the pasture. So you need to look at that. There is one grass out here that will kill them too. In fact, college did some research for another project on it, and that's switchgrass. And it'll form like a pyruvic acid in the stomach. A cow can digest it, but a horse can't because it has a different kind of stomach and doesn't have the bacteria in there. It's in mostly in our creek area, but horses are generally smart enough to stay away from it, and it's not in a large concentration. So this is when I really got in trouble with our big boss, is I wouldn't tear a whole hillside up and plant this particular grass, because it could be harmful to horses. It's one grass that they use for biofuel. But if it's gonna harm an animal, it's better not to grow it. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Catherine.
Questions from people about getting horses ready for big rides, like the Bigfoot ride, for example, or another really long ride. And they were asking about like exercise, physiology, kind of like what do you do to get a horse ready? And the biggest problem or the biggest point is that, and I think most of you know this, is that you can't just take your horse out of the pasture and go on one of those rides. Like you have to do little rides multiple times before an all-day ride. So, a couple hours, several times a week, building up to those rides. And it's just like you couldn't run a marathon tomorrow. Your horse can't either. And so we recommend riding them frequently, like at least 3 times a week as you're leading up to the big rides. Sorry, you have a question?
So what if they're breaking a horse on the ride? It's the first time they're riding that.
Well, it'll be hard on that horse. I mean, you can do that. So the other part is during the ride, is pay attention to your horse. If they're breathing really hard, they're having a hard time catching their breath, let them rest and give them a few minutes to recover. Like you can really damage muscles and or tendons. It's a good way to damage tendons because their muscles aren't strong enough. And so it's just risky if you don't let them recover during the ride or get them ready before anybody else have other questions or points on that? Okay. What do you feed them? So the question was, what do you feed them to get them ready for something like that? especially a big ride like the Bigfoot ride, you wanna go into it with a well-fleshed horse. You go into it thin and they're working hard and it's cold, they're gonna get really thin and again, could injure themselves. So feeding a little extra, like the cakes you feed, or a little grain even. And you don't necessarily want to feed a lot during the ride. They need their normal feed, but ahead of time, you certainly want to get them in shape and good weight ahead of time. Do you feed grain on those big rides? Yeah. So every horse
People
gets a
bring
little.
their own grain. I take along a ton of Cracker Jack. Range cake.
Mhm.
With 17%.
Yeah,
You take that along and whoever, it's open to whoever wants to.
yeah.
Is that those two things?
So they take that, that's there, you have seeds along the way, and I'm glad you said that, because, talk about this, because the Bigfoot ride is coming up, and all the horses I take on there, I separate them from the rest of them, and do exactly what you're saying. And ride them, take them for a short ride, get them exercise, then just put them in there and feed them. Drain them every other day, take them out riding, and just let them go. Let them be so they don't, they don't overexert themselves without no physical exercise prior to. But
Yeah.
you're right, they're gonna overexert themselves trying to, especially if they're not, don't have any exercise prior to it.
And they're
The
more
young
likely.
ones, the young horses that are getting trained on there, I've seen those horses being ridden to the point where they don't wanna go anymore. And we gotta stop that, they could ride the green brooks on there for maybe 2 days, because they don't know, haven't carried weight on their back, and it's the first time. The riders think that they have to ride them every day and all day. And can't do that, ride them every other day, because you ruin
Yeah,
the green horse. You ruin the horse,
yeah.
essentially.
And they're,
That's what the young riders need to understand that.
yeah. Lauren will talk about colic tomorrow, but they're much more likely to colic too if they're not in shape. And if they're, and if they haven't been fed anything like cakes or grain.
Yeah.
Because they're working really hard. Like if you go out and run really hard and I don't know about you, but sometimes afterwards I feel like almost kind of nauseated if I like really work my muscles hard. Because there's enzymes that come out of your muscles that can affect your digestive system and your whole body. And if your muscles aren't fit, you're going to really kind of have these almost toxins in you that can make them colic as well. So that's really important.
And so, I've heard some different opinions on this. I guess it's okay to ask, but what would be the best option for horses that are tender-footed? So I was going on a ride for quite a few years ago, and my father has a horse that's tender-footed. We can't go very long because of the ice. And I mean, we can't control the weather, we can't change that. We've got to ride anyways. And so when they're on that hard ice, those horses don't make it usually. I mean, very far anyways. But is it best to use shoes or without shoes? Or maybe what is some preventative care that we'd be able to do with the horses to be able to, so that it would be easier on them?
So sometimes if they tend to be kind of long on their toes, trimming them like now, and then in October, and then again, not right before, keeping that toe a little shorter, that will tend to give them a little more sole. And so they have a little more cushion underneath. That sometimes will help. At home, people use shoes on horses like that. I don't know, in Percy, you probably know better, if that would work on the Bigfoot ride. You'd have to have like studs or Oriole or something to grip. But it would help, shoes would help, it's just if you think the footing can handle it. Yeah,
You
right.
can't just put a regular,
No, maybe.
slide all over and you would need to be able to ride them.
Or maybe they'd have to be like an every other day horse or only a couple days.
Judy, is that something the farriers could teach people, maybe not just
set up, and then we'll do that for a little bit before we go out.
Everybody that was here,
What is he doing?
I'm gonna do a flap, triangle flap, 'cause that's what you see a lot.
Ingenious.
When we did the goats, you know, surgeries for junior surgery, it's like they did small animal rotation and then you'd rotate into the goats. Well, I did the small animal surgery rotation, so I already, you know, did sutures and did this and did that, and then went to the goats. And they're like, well, all you're gonna do today is you're just gonna make an incision on the side and sew it up, make an incision on the side. I said, well, I've already done all that. I said, can I do something else? And so I was doing Z-plasty flaps. You know, I'm like, you might, and so my goat, the first one was an I, and then I did like an X, like a Z, and an H-plasty. So my goat said, it's like almost spelled Izod. Because I did the Z flap. So, and then I did a curved. So my goat was Izod.
About the goat.
Right. This is what we're gonna do.
Have to show him how to inject,
Yep,
even though
right
it's
here.
not
My
working.
assistant's gonna get this ready. So here it is. What you've got is okay, this is the head of the horse, the body. This is the horse's like leg or something. He's got this flap. This is his hoof over here, okay? So in other words, blood supply is coming this direction, right? So blood supply is coming this direction, so is the nerve supply, okay? So this is, like I say, the hoof. So when I do the lidocaine, I'll just spray it right in the wound, like that first. And then that'll numb that area first for a few minutes. And then I'll come back, and you don't have to worry, like Judy said, about this flap so much, okay? So they don't feel it because why? They cut the nerve that feeds this part, because the nerve's coming from this direction. And so basically I start, you know, in the center and block, and then block, and then I'll block down this way. I'll usually block over here because sometimes the nerve comes from back here, it comes up to this way, and they might feel part of it here. And so then I'll block, you know, like along here a little bit. Okay? And then once I've got it blocked, how do you test to see if you can sew it up without the horse kicking you? Get your needle right there, just touch right there with the needle. And if the horse doesn't flinch, you got it blocked. Okay? Then you take your suture.
Normally you would trim.
Well,
But we're not gonna.
a lot of times, you know, yeah, you can trim the, actually what I do, sometimes what I do instead of trimming, I'll just take my scalpel blade and I'll just scrape the edge. Say it's not bleeding very much. And after I get done cleaning it, I like it to be bleeding. You know, the client just spent the last half hour stopping all the bleeding. What I do is I open it up, scrub it all up, block it, and then I do this and I make it bleed like crazy. You know, I scrape the edge just like that, okay? And I get these edges to bleed. They're like, oh, I just got to stop all the bleeding. I said, yeah, but the blood is good. That means it's got a good blood supply. It'll heal better, you know. So if it's not bleeding here, something's wrong. Maybe the artery, you know, vein, you know, has been damaged. So I want it to bleed. Because if it's not getting blood to it, it's not going to heal. So I like to see a lot of blood just before I sew it up. I shouldn't say that, a lot of blood, but I like to see that it's eating, that it's bleeding.
No pumping blood.
Yeah, no pumping. You know, you tie those off. If it squirts you in the face, you better put a hemostat on and tie it off. But the wound edges, you want them to be kind of like oozing blood, then you know you've got good blood supply too. And usually with a flap like this, I'll try to do the point first. Now this part is going to be the most likely part to die because the blood supply is coming from this direction. This point has to get its blood supply coming from this way, okay? So sometimes you'll lose that tip sometimes, okay? Sometimes it won't survive, and it'll still heal up and everything, but sometimes I've had these flaps where part of this piece will die off. It's not a big deal, okay? Take your suture, and I usually go right about in the middle of the needle, like that. And what I do is, the first one, I'll do what they call not a through and through, but I'll do a partial. I'll start here, and then I'll come, and it'll be a split thickness, they call it. See that? I'm right. That's a split thickness. The reason I'm doing that is because that'll hold it right into this corner, just perfect. And then I come split thickness again. I'm not going underneath the skin, I'm going right halfway through it. Now this, you guys probably don't have to worry about this, but for cosmetic effects, like you've got like an eyelid or something like that, it'll make a big difference because then you can pull, and then again, this is a surgeon knot, 2 throws, and then you pull it tight.
And the important part there is where he's pulling it equally, both directions.
Both directions at the same time,
So the knot comes
and then
down
I
right
come
in
back the
middle.
other way. And then I come this way, okay? And then I come back this way, and I do at least 4 throws, okay? And you notice I didn't pull it really, really tight. I just got the edges just together. The biggest problem that most vet students make when they start sewing up is they tie things too tight. And sometimes you actually leave a little bit of a gap because it's going to swell a little bit. See, there's a slight bit of a gap in there, and that's actually good, okay? Okay, so I did that point first because that's what I want to go first. Now, the rest of it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to go full thickness, okay? And then the other thing is, look, ooh, I cut through some of the muscle. Look, the muscle was actually separated. I got a ½ inch of muscle that's separated. Rather than sew that muscle up with absorbable suture and then come back with my skin suture, I'll just go deep, all the way through the skin, down deep through the muscle, and then back up. So I'm actually holding that muscle together too with this same stitch, but I didn't have to bury suture in there, okay? So then I'll come across, 2 throws as a surgeon's knot, and then see as I end, I started on the left, you know, or on the right, and I went to the left, and then I come back this way. Now this is going to end up on my right, and then I'm going this way, and it's going to end up on my left, and then this way, end up on my right again. Okay? And then after that, what I'll do is I have a big long incision, and like Judy said, if I use continuous all along here and it breaks, I'll lose all that. So if I've got a wound that might be draining at the bottom, I'll put interrupted stitches here, but I'll put my continuous above that. That way I can always take 1 or 2 of those bottom stitches out, and the rest of them are okay. Like 2 days later, it's got a big hematoma or swelling, I can remove that. So then the middle part, I'll sew with a continuous stitch, okay? So again, you come in, and I'm just doing the skin now because the muscle wasn't cut through, just that other part. Again, you go like that, and then you go your 2 throws, and then again, since I started on one side, I end on the other. Come back. Actually, this one didn't stay tight. Now, if I want it to stay tight, I'll take my assistant, and they'll come back to hold this tight, keep it from pulling apart. I'll have my assistant put pressure right there on the knot. She's going to do that.
You don't always have a trained dog.
You know, and so she's going to hold that tight, so when I let go of it, it doesn't untie. And she's going to hold it tight, and then what I'll do is I'll come here, and then she's going to lift up, see how she held it? Usually what I'll do is I'll go underneath the tip, and I'll actually do that before she even lifts up on it, okay? So now I've got this tight. I don't need her anymore to hold it tight because I got that second throw in there. Now this is going to be interrupted, or I mean a continuous stitch. And what you do, again, you go down an equal distance about, and you're going to go through like this.
With the continuous stitch,
Right.
you do the first one with a knot.
Yes, the first one you got to have a knot. Okay, so now I won't make any knots. You have to start somewhere. So then I come down again, equal distance, come down. Okay. Oop. That happens all the time. It's hooked on something. Well, yeah, you'd call that a whip stitch in regular sewing. And again, and then you go like this, okay? And you see I'm coming from the right because I'm right-handed. Okay? And like I told you before, if I start at the top of the leg and I'm going down, and this bottom spot I'll stop my continuous here and then put 1 or 2 simple interrupted so I can kick those out if I had to. But I'm just gonna show you how I end my stitch. Again, I go this way. And so there's my continuous. And I'm gonna end, well actually I can end this one. I can end this one. Now, instead of, I'm coming from the right, see? To end it, I'm going to come back, my last stitch is going to come from the left because you'll see how the knot lays better, okay? So I'm going to come back this way to end my stitch. Okay, I'm going to end my stitch coming back this way. And you leave your loop, okay? Stick your thing in there, you leave your loop, you pull it tight, you want to pull this tight, see? Oop. Well, it doesn't usually tear through the skin like that, but bananas kind of. So basically I'm going to leave my loop like that, and then again, I'm going to go this way, 2 throws, grab the top of that loop, hold it that way,
So it's helpful for me if this is perpendicular.
and then grab my loop again, that way, grab my loop again, that way.
3 times after you do the surgical.
I usually have a minimum of 3 throws total, but it's more like 4 or 5. You know, because I don't want that knot to be tied. I'd say most of the time I do 4 throws total, at least 3, but usually 4. Okay? And so that's it. And you'll notice that because my last stitch I came back the other way, it looks better. The knot looks better. If you did it the other way, your knot would be going across there. It just doesn't, it looks better when you come back the other way. It looks like more like the top knot there. And then to remove the stitches, you basically would just cut right here on this, and then you're going to have to cut this side too, okay? And then these, you don't have to cut each one of these, you can just pull them out until you get to the end stitch. Or you can cut them and take the little pieces out. But basically you just have to cut here and here. You have to cut this one and this one, okay? And then the rest of them will pull out. This one you have to cut like here and then here. And then to remove it, okay? All right, who's next?
Yeah.
And then we're just going to pull a little tighter. See, she had the braided, and it lays a lot easier. This has got a lot of memory. See this memory? See how it's staying curled? Where that just laid flat. This is more like silk and regular thread. It's so much easier to tie. Okay, this is more rigid. Okay, it has memory. And it see how it's keeping its shape, and it's harder for you. This is actually easier to tie with. Just like my necktie, if I tie with silk, it's a lot easier to tie than if I use polyester.
So this is a thinner gauge thread?
It's a thinner gauge, plus it's a braided nylon. This is monofilament, absorbable. Okay.
I kind of understand that because studying the rope.
Yep, the ropes have different, you know, like your lariat is stiff.
Right. Right.
Okay, and then you're like the rope that you use just to tie their foot or something like that. That's floppy, like your lead rope. Okay, your lead rope's floppy, and it doesn't maintain. Your lariat keeps that perfect circle. It's got a lot of memory. Sometimes it's not as easy as we make it look sometimes. But then once you do it 100 times, yeah, see you're pulling it too tight, but that's just because the banana skin doesn't have a, okay. Do we have a sharp, Judy? Yes, we do have a sharp. Judy? Sharps?
Yeah, it kind of bounces back too when you pull it.
Yeah, so whenever you go to tighten, you're going to have to pull and come back, and then let it pull through, then guide it in so it don't do that with you, yeah. Especially on this memory stuff. And
makeup of it itself. You know, the good book is if you work with ropes, get the book on knot tying, and it tells you the different types of ropes and how they're made, what the stretch is, what is a breaking point. They have a different term as to how much weight it can hold. So, I mean, like I study it at home. I actually carry a piece with me to try to show people that to tether your horse or tie it strong, use a couple different knots I want to use.
So let's throw another couple knots on there.
Oh, I see, sharps.
So you want to try to keep uniform with your stitch.
So the going around the needle grabber twice, you only have to do that for the very first one. And then you can just.
That's what I said. You pull.
Yeah, normally you wouldn't pull through like that, you know, so don't worry about it, you know.
It's hard to put the needle on right now. So.
Is there a point of where? Is there a point, Doc, where you ever had to use your string to the fullest extent because maybe you just only had that one suture, or you have one that you can add to?
Yeah, you know, I didn't have the right size suture. I had too small a suture, so sometimes I just double it up.
Okay.
You know, use you know a 2-strand. But that's if you have a needle with an eye in it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and then I'll double it up. I've done that, like double or tripled it up.
Right.
You know, like
See,
run it.
because like at the leather store, you can buy these type of needles.
Right.
And they have the eye where you can. double
Right,
up.
right, and you can double it up if you want more strength.
Right.
Or you use a horizontal pattern with the little stays, you know, the rubbers, you know, the
Right.
IV line stays.
This
So-
is sterile pack.
Here, this is what I'm talking about.
See, we just get needles and then spade.
And see here, this you can thread your needle through there and you can double it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
Okay,
like.
so
with
you're
something-
ending it now, right? Because you started on the opposite end and go right at your tip. Go all the way up to the tip of your. There you go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold that. So hold that. Okay, see? Now you're going to come over the top. Yep, perfect. And now what you're going to do is pull it towards you so you're underneath. Go underneath and now pull it tight, see? And you tied it tight before I even took it off, because you slipped right underneath my hemostat. Now you want to pull that, what you do is just put it in here and see how it pulls both ends of that knot. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. If you grab it up here, this will pull tight and this will be loose, you know. And once you get it started, then you can just put it. Yeah, if you're not perfectly in the center of that, then you have to stick your, yeah, perfect. And then go ahead and cut your.
Is this cut?
Yeah, you got to open it up. See the jaw? You have to open it up farther. There you go. See the jaw, the cut part is,
Then cut
that way
this.
you've got a cut and a holder all in the same. This is what they call a needle holder, because it does both cutting and, you know, holding, like a pliers.
So why do you think he's walking stiff on it?
Because they hurt.
MJ, pull him up 2 more feet when she's done looking at it.
Also, it's on his joint.
Yeah, it's really close, isn't it?
Right below it.
It is just a little below it. Had it been, here's the bone, and under there's the joint. Like it could have been in the joint. It was really close. It's not because he's doing okay, but it had to have been really close. It's and so he's so swollen, and some of his stiffness is, you know, because if if you just get that swollen, you can't bend your joints well. Do you think it's infected? Yeah.
Maybe a little.
I know. I actually am kind of like you. I'm like, kind of infected?
Yeah, it looks like it could be.
It's not like horrible infected because the whole leg would be big and there'd be drainage. And the surface of it is pretty healthy. But because it's still so swollen a month later, I would think there is some infection like in the tissue around it. So this is the proud flesh or the granulation tissue we talked about. But he's not, like it's not sticking out to here. He's not overdoing it like some horses do. It's actually kind of controlling itself. This is all fresh skin on the edge here, you can see. And Percy cleaned this up quite a few times, and that's why it is as good looking as it is. He didn't clean it up here just recently. Oh.
Yeah, I just left it so then you could use it
So we could see it, yeah.
use it as a.
So why don't we'll get some stuff from your truck, Ray. I don't know where. Oh. Well, we'll get some stuff and I'll have you guys clean it up. And one of the things when we were talking about the proud flesh and that you can cut it away, when it's like this, you don't need to cut it, but we'll show you how you want to really scrub hard with your hands and get all that crud scraped off when you're cleaning it. And that alone will make it bleed a little bit, and that'll stimulate some healing and get it to close in. Okay. So we'll grab some gloves, and I'll have a couple of you wash that up.
Alright, let's move him a couple more feet away so that everyone can be on this side.
Yeah, maybe over here.
I only squirted like a couple teaspoons of iodine into this. If you can look at the color, it's pretty. It's like that color brown. That's what you want. You know, kind of see-through, a light brown. You don't need more than that, or it could damage the tissue. So a couple of you put gloves on.
One or two.
Whichever you want. You probably use one hand, but you can do it however you want. So I'm going to have you take just the iodine water and kind of scrub with your hand, and then we'll use some 4x4 gauze and scrub, and you'll see it if it's more effective or not. You can carry that and I can hold it over by you. And just always let them know you're here. Start out, don't like just grab it.
Yes.
You know that, I'm sure.
So just kind of start peeling it, or?
Yeah, just kind of scrub at it gently at first, and he shouldn't really feel much on the edges. He might tell you he feels it. Yeah, you're gonna have to, because it's old and dry, you're gonna have to scrub kind of hard.
Ronan is pushing on there. Yeah, that's not my that's not them hawking, that's the baby. Discovering the horn.
And here's, if you want to try it with that.
Kind of push harder.
Yeah, you'll see with the 4x4 it's easier.
Yeah.
I personally like to stay standing because if they kick, I don't want my face down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just some people tell me.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's good.
People can get them too. Usually it's in the winter.
Got one picture.
You just drop it for now, we'll throw it away.
It's a hot day and a bunch of
Take my glove off for it.
flies got after you.
You don't have to too much. You want to get some on there, some volume.
You know,
It can run down his leg, it won't hurt you.
What's his name now again?
Just grab that with your glove and then turn it
What's his name
inside
now
out.
again?
Huh?
Quasar.
Quasar?
And remember, there's no nerves on this, so it doesn't really hurt him unless you're pulling the scab off that's right on the edge that he might notice. You can see his hair is all funny because of all that crusting. Oh, that's a good thing to bring up. Last summer when I was here, or last summer, 3 months ago, when we were here working, I saw a horse with a cut like this, and it was all crusty from all the pus and stuff that ran off. And we weren't going to clean it off at first. Well, we cleaned the wound. I wasn't going to clean the leg at first. And then I looked at it closer, and it was full of maggots. They were all living under that crust. So it's important to get that crust off. Yeah, good. Yeah, exactly.
Just like how he was doing it.
Yeah, so that looks
Give you
good.
your fingernails.
So you can't, if anyone else wants to work on it, you want to do something on it, Michael?
Get up
Gloves
there
right
and get
there.
on it.
Yeah, okay. There's
Are you-
some,
Oh, shit, I thought that was everybody.
So this is,
Put your arm on it.
it's proud flesh, like we talked about. It's not going to bleed a lot because it's kind of healed so much.
Gee, that's big.
You guys hear what Judy and I are talking about?
From right here, huh?
When you start wrapping this leg, we always try to wrap it and go in the direction where you pull the tendon medially, pulling the tendon underneath the horse, okay? Personally, I don't think it makes any difference to the horse or putting on a good bandage, but all the trainers think you're supposed to do it that way. So if you go in there and do it the other way, they'll think you don't know what you're doing.
Take that and wrap around. And you can pull pretty tight. So with this, he can pull pretty tight because he's got this cushion under it, and it's not vet wrap. It's not real stretchy, so even a little tighter. And so if you want to have good support and pressure against your wound, this you can pull almost as tight as you can and go down. And he's going to overlap it like by 50% about and like work his way down the leg. And the easiest wounds to wrap are the ones that are right here in the middle. When they're above the knee or above the hock, it's hard because the bandages just want to slide down.
Yeah, so it has to be a little tight.
Yeah, or you put one on here and then one on above it, so it sits on top of this one.
And if you know what your leg wrap is and all that, usually you know where you start like 3/4 the way at the top and you go down and then come back up and then you usually end at the top with your Velcro. That you got to know, you got to be used to how long your leg wrap is and how thick and stuff the leg is and all that. But with practice, you'll get it where you go down and then back up again and then end right at the top.
And if this is sticking out like that, and especially if some horses will kind of bite at it, you can always just take duct tape and put it around it. Yeah, kind of hold it.
You
Yeah,
kind of want it sticking out at either end of your leg wrap. You don't want to cover it up completely. You want it to be sticking off the bottom a little bit.
So why doesn't somebody else? There's another couple wraps over there too.
And so like when it comes to
Somebody can practice on the other leg even.
Yeah, we have enough.
so when it comes to like wrapping racehorse legs, because they do it a lot after after they race.
Yeah.
Is there
They just do
is
it a
that
lot
the same
harder.
way that they'll wrap them? Say they're sore, they put that mud on them, and then they wrap them up.
Yeah.
Do they wrap them that same way? Because they're telling me like there's a specific way that they need to wrap them.
It's always tendon in. Yeah,
Is
it's
that what
that
you're
same
talking
thing. Yeah. And like Ray said, honestly, I don't think it really matters, but the whole world thinks it does, so we all just do it that way.
Just
It's
like
never
getting
been
up
shown
on the
to
left-hand
matter.
side of the horse. Or in the end, you get up on the right side.
Then let them know I'm coming, pinch the skin.
Yep.
No.
I can do a double there.
Don't worry about
Usually just
injecting it.
hold the
Hold the
skin
syringe
as I do
with
it.
your hand. Don't worry about holding the end of the syringe.
No.
Go all the way in. Good job, all the way. Check for blood.
Like this.
Get it out just a bit.
Yep.
Try to put yourself up.
Shouldn't be able to pull anything.
No
Alright,
blood.
looks good. Give about half.
Oh, y'all leave?
I wanted to get in there and get one.
Is it hard to give?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, that's about half.
Go halfway.
Grandma's
Back in.
Yep. Good job.
There
Check for blood again, because you're in a different spot. That looks good. Not getting anything. Penicillin is a little thinner, so it goes a little easier which is what you guys are gonna take home at the end of the week. This will last 4 days, and then he'll get another shot in 4 days.
Same thing?
Yep. And then just pull straight out. Good job. Perfect.
Oh, okay.
At first I thought it was
Cool.
At first I thought it was